David, are we ready? Okay, great. Good evening, and I would like to begin with the land acknowledgement. The West Hollywood Planning Commission acknowledges that the land on which we gather and that is currently known as the City of West Hollywood is the occupied, unceded, seized territory of the Gabrielino Tonga and Gabrielino Kij peoples. It is now 6:32 p.m., and I will call this regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting to order. And to start, Commissioner Matos, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Secretary Gillig, may we please have roll call?
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Commissioner Solomon. Here. Commissioner Matos.
Present.
Commissioner Huppengarner.
Present.
Commissioner Jones.
Here.
Commissioner Carvalero.
Here.
Vice Chair Gregoire.
Here.
Chair Lombardi.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Thank you. Which moves us to item number 4, which is approval of today's agenda.
I'll move.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Moved by Commissioner Jones, seconded by Commissioner Matos. And the motion passes unanimously, approving the agenda as presented for August 15th, 2024.
Thank you. Item number 5 is approval of the minutes, and we have minutes from the August 1st, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. Are there any edits from staff or any comments or edits from the commission? No? Okay.
We have a motion by Commissioner Huppengarner.
I'll second.
Thank you.
And who's second? Thank you. And seconded by Commissioner Jones. And the motion passes unanimously, approving the minutes as presented for August 1st, 2024.
Thank you. And item number 7 is the director's report, and I believe Nick Merritt. Oh, public comments?
Yeah.
Thank you. David, do we have any public commenters today?
We don't have any for this general public comment.
Okay. Anyone on the Zoom platform? No? No? Okay. Thank you. Item number 7 is our director's report.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Planning Commissioners. Nick Marasich, Community Development Director for the City of West Hollywood. I have 3 items for my report this evening. The first, you may have heard me mention at past meetings about the Willoughby, Vista Gardner, and Kings Road Street Design Concept Plan and some of the meetings that the city has held related to that project. This was a priority project in the pedestrian and bicycle mobility plan adopted back in 2019 with the objective to enhance the neighborhoods and protect the safety of pedestrians and cyclists through strategic street improvements across the corridor, aiming to make safer, more accessible routes for walking and bicycling while reducing cut-through traffic. And we are planning another community meeting that we're inviting community members to attend to review parking considerations specifically along Vista Gardner as part of the street plan. The community meeting and parking-focused discussion will take place on Thursday, August 22nd at the Plummer Park Community Center in rooms 5 and 6, 7377 Santa Monica Boulevard. And the meeting is drop-in. There is no advance RSVP needed. The purpose of this in-person discussion is to provide community members with information regarding the proposed parking reconfiguration along Vista Gardner that's outlined in the plan and to receive feedback on proposed changes. City staff will provide a brief presentation on design alternatives being considered and will request feedback from the community. We are going to continue to provide additional opportunities for feedback as the concepts get refined through the design and engineering phase. and we are looking at ways to minimize impacts to on-street parking. For up-to-date information about the project, you can go to the city's Engage WeHo information and feedback page, which is engage.weho.org/Willoughby. The second item is
Sorry,
that we
what
have...
time was that? What time?
That time is on August 22nd at 6 p.m.
Until when?
Do we have an end time at this? 6 to 7:30. Thank you. The second item is that we're welcoming Ciclavia back to the city of West Hollywood this coming Sunday. It's Ciclavia Meet the Hollywoods presented by Metro. It will take place on Sunday, August 18th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The event will close Santa Monica Boulevard to vehicle traffic between La Brea and San Vicente, and thousands of cyclists and pedestrians are expected to fill the streets. The route, which traverses the city of West Hollywood and the city of Los Angeles neighborhoods of Hollywood and East Hollywood, will be transformed into car-free open streets for the day. And everyone is invited to come along for the ride and walk, bike, roll, and stroll through the area's iconic streets. For more information, you can go to Ciclavia's website. That's www.ciclavia.org. And the third item is the launch of the city's new permitting system. The city is expected to launch, has announced that we'll be launching a new comprehensive enterprise permitting and licensing management system this month, actually this coming Monday. And this new software will transform our processes to make them more user-friendly, but we appreciate everyone bearing with us while we make this transition. We're going to be replacing multiple software platforms that have been previously used in isolation, which we hope will streamline operations and improve service delivery for residents, businesses, vendors, and stakeholders who interact with the city's permitting processes. This will include building and safety permitting, plan check review and inspection, current planning and historic preservation, long-range planning, our engineering division, neighborhood and business safety, code enforcement, and business licensing, among others. Some of the highlights of the new system are that we will include customer portals so you can track applications and project submittals, fully electronic plan submittals and reviews, guided assistance for applicants through the application process, integration with the LA County Assessor's Office for updated parcel information, mobile responsive interface to support staff working in the field, and seamless payment options that will be offered within the platform. So to accommodate this upgrade, certain city services have been taken offline starting yesterday through the end of this week. Our public counters are still open and operational this week to provide limited services, but we're not able to accept new applications or issue permits until the new system launches this coming Monday. All of our applications and permitting services are expected to resume Monday, August 19th at 10 a.m. once the new system is launched. And as I said, we know that and understand that this may cause an inconvenience, and we appreciate the patience from community members as we work to implement this upgrade. And with that, that concludes my report. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our Community Development Director? Commissioner Carvalero?
Yeah. I'm very excited about this new software, but will you be integrating current projects that are in the pipeline into the roster?
Yes, that's actually the reason that we're taking this pause this week for 3 days, is to allow for the full migration of all of the active projects and permits that are in the old system that we were using, and have those be migrated to the new system. So we had to set a date when we were going to stop entering things into the old system and have that process, that conversion process, take place, and that's what's happening right now.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Yeah, will the full plans be available? So for example, full CDs, construction documents be available? For example, as projects modify once they've been approved, will those be available to the public online?
We're still working through some of those workflows. I do expect that there will be much more information that will be available to both applicants and the public through the new system. Until we get it up and running, I don't want to overstate, what exactly those capabilities, but we do expect that much more information about projects will be readily available to people through the online platform.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to come back and provide an update on that in the future once we get it up.
Probably it would be really nice to have a full demo.
I need to.
Yeah, we would love to do that. So And as I say, it goes beyond planning and building and affects many of the city's other permitting and licensing functions as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Secretary
And
Koch.
yeah, Chair, if we could circle back to public hearing, we do have a person in Zoom that we did miss out on.
Of course.
Hello, may I speak?
Yes, we can hear you. Please state your name and city of residence.
Yes, hi, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Susana Lagudis, and I've resided at 1124 North La Cienega Boulevard since December of 1989. I'm speaking here because I'd like to request that the planning staff and the Commissioners take a good hard look at the history and record of proponents, developers, and contractors behind each project that is proposed, not just the project itself. In my particular case, my building and residents have been subjected to more than 4 years of trespassing, destruction, and damaging of our property, health and safety issues due to fugitive dust and debris, and more. Just today, I've spent time from my busy workday contacting code compliance, building and safety, South Coast AQMD, and OSHA about fugitive dust from cement grinding and the layer of mulch and fertilizer, which is now covering
Susan?
our entire side yard.
Susan?
Yes?
Could you hold on one moment, please?
Yes.
We're having a really hard time hearing
Of
you.
course. Okay.
So if we can get the volume turned.
I have my.
Okay, now we can hear you. Why don't you start again
Can
so
you
that
hear
we
me
can hear
better?
everything you said?
Okay, can you hear me fine?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, because I have all my audio turned all the way up, so I don't know what the issue is. But anyway, okay, so I will start over again. My name is Susana Lagudis. I've resided at 1124 North La Cienega Boulevard since December of 1989. I'm speaking here because I'd like to request that the planning staff and commissioners take a hard look at the history and record of the proponents, developers, and contractors behind each project that is proposed, not just the project itself. In my particular case, my building and residents have been subjected to more than 4 years of trespassing, destruction and damaging of our property, health and safety issues due to fugitive dust and debris, and more. Just today, I have spent time from my busy workday contacting code compliance, building and safety, South Coast AQMD, and OSHA about fugitive dust from cement grinding and the layer of mulch and fertilizer, which is now covering our entire side yard because no protection in the form of a fence with netting was ever put up to protect us. This developer is a bad player on many, many levels, and they should have been vetted before they were allowed to build this 24-unit luxury condo. I hope that the planning staff and the commission will take into consideration the many complaints that the city has received about them should they ever propose another project and reject them. I do not want any other neighborhood or community to have to suffer what we have experienced, including a looming nearly $1 million repair to protect our foundation and building from collapsing due to water infiltration caused by their actions. My 26-unit not luxury condo is seriously going to go bankrupt over this. Also, so please, please, please get professional geologists and engineers on the planning staff who understand and can review the plans appropriately before they go to the engineers and plan check at building and safety, where they've already checked off all the correct boxes, but they still end up causing devastating health and safety threatening damage and destruction to the neighbors. Thank you very much for your time, and I will be back to speak on the zone text amendment later.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Chair, that's our last public speaker.
My name is Susanna.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 8, consent calendar. There are no items. Same for item number 9, public hearings subject to the Housing Accountability Act. So item 10, public hearings, section 2, other items that require public hearing under the law. And we have one item today, which is a zone text amendment. This is the second time we are hearing this zone text amendment. This is a public hearing regarding a proposed amendment to increase the permitted projections above the allowed height for hotel rooftop structures with the approval of a conditional use permit citywide. And do we have a staff report for this item?
Yes, we do. just shared my screen, so. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. Get this closer. My name is Tahira Ferris. I'm with the Long Range Planning section, and I will be presenting tonight on the zone text amendment to allow for projections above the height limit for hotel rooftop structures. This hearing, as you mentioned, is continued from the June 6th hearing where we initially heard, where it was initially heard by your commission. So we'll provide a quick recap of the background on this item, and then we'll take a look at the comments that we heard on June 6th and discuss our responses to those comments, and then we'll look at the revised zone text amendment and staff's recommendation. So there were 2 city council directives that spurred this item, one in 2020 and another one in 2022, that focused on the exploration of allowing for projections above the height limit for structures such as bathrooms or service kitchens on top of hotels. Initially, this was part of a hotel recovery initiative and identified by city council at the time, and after there was a report back from staff on this item, this is where the conversation landed for this allowance of a projection above the allowed height. So I will like to just point out that there is a separate item that City Council has also directed staff to look at related to hotels and serving non-guests at hotels. That is not covered in this zone text amendment, so just want to be clear about that. So after taking a look at the Long-Range Planning Project Subcommittee and Governmental Affairs Committee comments early on in the process, this item was brought to the Planning Commission in June of this year, and a number of questions were raised, many around noise impacts and code enforcement procedures. And so the hearing at the time was continued to give staff additional time to consult with the noise consultant that we originally worked with, as well as our code enforcement staff and the city's urban designer to respond to some of the comments and questions that Commission had. So this slide just provides a list of the items that were discussed during the June 6th hearing. There were a number of questions related to project eligibility, so what hotels might be eligible to utilize the zone text amendment were it to be approved. Also questions around noise impacts and some of the mitigation measures that were proposed, as well as visual impacts, and then also the review procedures, noticing procedures, and code enforcement as well. So I do want to also point out that this zone text amendment is specifically focused on rooftops, and so we are not talking about, rooftop structures. We are not talking about uses that may be permitted on rooftops, as those are regulated by a CUP process already. Many of the hotels already do have existing CUPs that regulates what types of uses and activities can occur. And so this zone text amendment specifically looks at the projection of structures above the height limit. And then I'll also just point out that when we say rooftop, we're really talking about the highest point of the building and the activities on top of that. So some hotels may have like a pool deck or something that's on a lower level, but outside and not technically on their roof. We're not regulating those with this zone text amendment. So staff did do additional research and analysis to confirm what some of the neighboring jurisdictions are actually doing in regards to this type of allowance. And then we did have additional conversations, as I mentioned, with our noise expert who is actually on the line on Zoom. So if there are questions later on related to that, we can have them respond. That was Rincon Consultants. We also talked with our code enforcement staff to have a better understanding of the code enforcement procedures. We do have staff here tonight as well in case questions come up. And we also talked with our urban designer to respond to some of the landscaping questions. So I will highlight again that the zone text amendment is meant to include sort of the minimum standards. The Planning Commission will always have discretion to condition any individual project beyond what the minimum standards are. And then of course, if any project does have a noise study associated with it, then there would be recommended conditions along with that. Planning Commission can take those recommendations or they can go above and beyond. So there's always that authority of the Planning Commission. So going back to one of the first topics that was discussed on June 6th around project eligibility, There was a question, should different hotels be allowed to have structures that project above the height limit versus other hotels? So we went back and just kind of looked at the council directive or the information that was provided, and at the time there was no distinction on how to treat hotels differently or whether to treat them differently, so that was not initially considered. Given the nature of a lot of these existing buildings, there will be structural considerations where not all of them will be eligible for this anyway. There are currently 20 hotels in the city. 13 of them do currently have rooftop activities, and I think those are noted in the staff report. Those activities, again, are already permitted through a CUP, so this zone text amendment could not alter any of those activities that are already approved. And then the question around whether hotels in residential or commercial zones should be treated differently. If you look at the map, I know it's kind of small, but I'll point out a lot of the hotels are along Sunset Boulevard, but then we have some sprinkling of hotels throughout residential areas. But even the ones along Sunset do have residential behind them, abutting behind them. And so given the nature of the city development and proximity between residential and commercial uses, it didn't make sense to not apply certain standards to hotels depending on what zone they're in. The green shading on the screen there is R4 zoning, and then the orange, the kind of darker orange shading is R2 zoning. So you can see the residential areas there. There were a number of questions at the last hearing around noise considerations. So we did continue to consult with Rincon Consultants to talk with our noise expert who actually did the programmatic noise study that was presented at the previous hearing. And what we determined, I think we talked about this last time as well, is that a noise study will be required on a project-specific basis. And so the standards that are in here for noise mitigation, are a minimum of what would be required, but any noise study that might be required will identify project-specific mitigation measures that would have to be taken into account. So there was a question about sound barrier minimum height of 5 feet. We talked with the noise consultant, and as we learned that is sort of an industry standard as a minimum, but a noise study, of course, could recommend a higher height for that. And so the language in the zone text amendment specifies that whatever the higher of the two is the one that you would have to go with. And then on top of that, of course, the Planning Commission could always request something outside of either of those. The noise consultant also explained the canyon effect. I think there was conversation around that last time, and the consensus was canyon effect might not be the most appropriate term to describe what was going on, but that there probably are concerns about more of a cumulative effect or combined effect of noise. And so we did add a requirement in the noise study to consider that, so that it's not just considering the individual proposed noise source, but also considering the cumulative effect of combined noise. And then finally, we also specified that the minimum qualifications for a noise consultant to do those project-specific noise studies would have to be done by a third party with a minimum number of years of experience and a degree from an accredited college, or their firm would have to have their principal that has those qualifications. And so that is specified, and the city also does plan to develop a list of pre-qualified noise consultants in the future that could then be provided to applicants to utilize. So we also looked at standards related to visual impacts. Given the last conversation, we did talk with the urban designer, and there were questions around whether there should be some sort of setback or step back, and we came to the conclusion of 18 inches for every foot that the structure projects above the height limit, then the setback would be 18 inches. There was also a comment that the landscaping requirements should be consistent with what's in the existing code. So we did look at the Municipal Code Chapter 19.26, which is landscaping standards. Those standards are really specific to uses that are more at the ground level. So we tried to adapt them to a rooftop standard. And so the language proposed is that language consistent with what does apply from 19.26. In addition to some new standards, we required use of native species or non-invasive plants as well. And then we also added some language around design compatibility actually into findings, so that design compatibility was clarified to be in context with the overall structure and any existing accessory structures, and in terms of materials used or massing or scale, and that's going to be a finding that's required rather than a standard. There was also a suggestion to increase the noticing radius to 1,000 feet, so we did include that as well. This will be required for the neighborhood meeting that's required for any of these applications, as well as for the public hearing notice, so there will be that 1,000-foot radius. And then again, we added additional findings to talk about design compatibility and also consistency with the existing CUP if there is one. There were a number of questions as well around code compliance and specifically related to our noise ordinance. So we talked again with our code enforcement staff to obtain some additional information. So to provide you with a little bit of background, the city did update its noise ordinance in 2016 to use what's called a reasonable person standard. I believe there was some discussion about decibel levels last time, and that is something that the city actually moved away from. This reasonable person standard states that any amplified sound shall not be plainly audible to a reasonable person at a distance of 25 feet from the source. So this actually allows staff greater flexibility to enforce the regulations. A sound, for example, that might be just below what the decibel limit might be could still constitute a public disturbance. So this gives code enforcement staff that flexibility to be able to enforce on things that are considered a nuisance. And there was also some questions around existing activities and special events permits. And so just want to point out again that currently the hotel rooftop activities are permitted through their CUPs. Some hotels can obtain special use permits to operate certain types of events. That cannot be regulated by the CTA. That's a separate process, so that is not discussed in the CTA. So again, just focusing on the physical structures and the height limit to that. And then I'll just mention that code enforcement did assure us that they do respond to complaints as they are received, and they do work with operators to obtain immediate compliance. That can result in citations, that can result in shutting down an event, and it could have future implications on applications for activities or events to occur. Those applications could be denied if a specific operator is continuously non-compliant. So with that, I just want to, again, reiterate that this zone text amendment is really about applying to structures that are proposing to go above the height limit or the existing height of the hotel. And it would require a CUP or CUP amendment for any hotel that already has a CUP. CUPs are governed by West Hollywood Municipal Code section or chapter 1952, and they are required to go to the Planning Commission. So everything would be heard by the Planning Commission, which then has discretion to further condition any project beyond any conditions that are already applied. So with that, staff is recommending the Planning Commission adopt the resolution recommending approval to the City Council for the zone text amendment to allow for hotel rooftop structures, allow for hotel rooftop structures to have extended height above the height limit with a conditional use permit, and finding that action exempt from CEQA.
Thank you. Before we ask questions of staff and public comment, are there any disclosures that anyone would like to make at this time? Commissioner Carvalero?
Yeah, I just want a clarification question.
Okay.
So if you build a bar that's 15 feet high, you're going to have a 22-foot, 6-inch setback from the edge of the building. Because if
Sorry,
you're going,
I didn't hear that, sorry.
So if you're building a bar that's 15 feet high, you're going to require a 22-foot, 6-inch setback around the entire rooftop?
Around the structure. The structure would have to be set back, correct.
Okay, so if it's on the corner, 22'6" from either end, and then what, okay.
Correct, yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I wanted to understand. And that, can that be landscaped?
Yes, so the structure would be required to have landscaping if it is abutting a residential zone.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
then that's a minimum requirement that we're adding. They can do additional landscaping, as much as they'd like.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Solomon.
I think just piggybacking off of what Commissioner Carvalho just asked, but the 18-inch setback required for every foot above the height limit. Which height limit? The rooftop height limit or the 15-foot?
So the setback is it's 18 inches for every foot above the existing height or the height limit. So some rooftops are already above height limit.
Grandfathered in.
Yeah, so it would be whatever above
Okay.
the roof line.
The roof line. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for clarification? Commissioner Hoopengarner?
Yes, to be clear then, any sound wall would have to be at that setback. In other words, the sound wall couldn't be built at the building edge. The sound wall would have to be built at the 22 feet, 6 inches line.
So as it's written, yeah, structures are required to be set back.
Including any sound walls.
If they are considered structures.
When wouldn't they be considered a
So, yeah.
structure?
Yeah, the guidelines are that the further away the sound barrier is, the more effective it is.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But
something to
my
consider.
question relates to the fact that in the resolution as proposed, you could have a solid masonry wall structure as your sound barrier, which would visually be a 5-foot tall wall around the building.
And that would be set back.
And that would have to be set back. So if it was glass, it wouldn't have to be?
No, it would.
They would?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
everything would have to be set back, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So 18 inches for every 5 foot. In this case, if it were a 5-foot tall wall, it would have to be set 18 inches times 5 from the edge of the building.
Okay, thank you. Can you did it sort of in bits and pieces, but can you, for my benefit, give me a complete outline of what has changed from what you proposed 2 months ago? Because I had a difficult time sort of going through picking out each bit and understanding, what was it before and what are you proposing now?
So we stepped back because there was a lot of conversation around uses and activities, which are actually currently regulated by other CUPs. So we took that out of the equation. This is to focus solely on the structures above the height limit. So that was the major change. We also responded to, so there was the question about landscaping. We made sure that that was consistent and added additional language there. We added the setback language. We added the noticing requirement that was requested. We also looked at, let me go back. We looked at some of the sound mitigation and we added some more context just to, going back to my notes here. Some of it was responding to questions about procedures. So you heard in the conversation a lot of question response. But as far as the noise mitigation, we also wanted to just clarify the noise study has to consider cumulative effects and combined effects. So it's not just considering the proposed source, but it's considering the potential noise around that structure or other sources that are already creating noise. We also, make sure I cover everything here. Oh, we also added additional findings. So in addition to just the required findings for a CUP, there are additional findings around design compatibility and also making sure that it is consistent with the existing CUP if there is one.
Okay, thank you. So help me understand the timeline here. The initial council initiative in August of 2020 was a hotel recovery incentives initiative meant to address the COVID crisis. And I went through it this afternoon. It didn't even include the word roof. Then 2 years later, it appears that none of that was actually addressed, but then a staff update on August of 22 added evaluating height restrictions on new structures and uses to existing hotel rooftops. So it was never part of the initial council directive, but it appeared in a staff update to council. Then, in that, in fact, it says that this is a status report on the city council directive from August of 2020 regarding access by the general public to amenities in hotels and residential neighborhoods, notice residential neighborhoods, and possibly adding new structures and uses to existing hotel rooftops. That whole thing is a new addition added by staff, correct?
Yes, so.
Okay. That later item was never part of the council initiative, the initial council initiative. Okay. So then, this update also only discussed hotels in residential neighborhoods. It didn't discuss anything about hotels in commercial zones. And in fact, I quote, in addition to the council directive of August 2020, which is not true because there was never discussion of rooftops in August of 2020, there have been repeated requests by hotel operators and informal discussion by city decision makers about amending the zoning code to allow additional height for hotels with rooftop amenities. Rooftop uses on hotels have been controversial over the years, it says in that staff update. In fact, it goes on to say, however, the city routinely receives complaints from neighbors when crowds gather and become noisy, especially in the evening. In fact, decision makers have also questioned whether the rules should be more restrictive to reduce the use of rooftops. So now, 4 years later, we're looking at a 15-foot height increase with noise and all of the things that seems to be completely contrary to both the initial council initiative as well as the content of the staff update and what the neighborhoods want, et cetera. So help me understand, how did we get here? How did staff get from COVID response to 4 years later adding 15 feet to rooftop hotels along with et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, Commissioner, if you read that next paragraph in that staff report, it does mention that staff believes that a good next step would be to take this item, the discussion about rooftop amenities or additional height, to the long-range planning subcommittee for discussion, and then kind of, do that additional review. So with the adoption of the receive and file of this report by the city council, I think the staff at the time, it was also before my time, sort of initiated that action. It's like, okay, well, we got the okay to move forward because it wasn't declined by the city council as an item for us to study. So at that time, it became like a directive as part of our work plan. And since then, we've been trying to kind of process that through the channels for the zone text amendment.
Even though it wasn't pointed out to council at the time that that was a completely new component. It was never part of the initial item from Councilmember Heilman.
Right, it was part
Okay.
of the staff report that did go to council for
Okay.
the receive and file. Yeah.
So help me understand why you are proposing that the applicant is going to be allowed to choose the independent, in air quotes, noise consultant? Why was that the decision chosen?
That's typically how consultants are chosen for independent studies when they're required. I don't know if we have current planning staff here, but my understanding is that's not atypical to have the applicant hire a third-party consultant.
Pay for, yes. Hire is a different thing. There's two different things. Select the consultant and pay for the consultant. So I'm trying to understand why the applicant is being allowed to select the independent consultant.
My understanding is that is typical of city procedures when there's a land use application that requires additional studies, that the applicant would have a consultant that they select and pay for. It gets reviewed by staff, and so there can be challenges to that if staff doesn't agree or if the commission doesn't agree. But I believe that's how it generally, the general procedures.
Yeah, I think it could be a variety of different ways. Like if the applicant does pay for the analysis, we typically do our own sort of independent evaluation, but 90-some% of the time, the applicant pays for the CEQA consultant.
Of course, that's
yeah.
by law.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they should be selecting.
Correct. Yeah, and we can modify that
And
requirement.
it's back to
right.
independence, and I find it difficult to reconcile independence and
Right.
applicant selecting.
Yeah, yeah, and we have kind of included an additional action that we want to build up our noise consultant list based on the requirements that we're providing to the commission today. So if we go that route, we should probably then be very specific and state that an applicant or the city can select one of these pre-approved noise study consultants. So that's definitely a change we can make.
Without getting into discussion, but maybe you just automatically rotate through the list, so there's just no
Correct.
discussion. It's just a sequential, you're next, you do the next study. Okay. Can you tell us, and we brought this up last time, but I still don't see the answer to, how many of the hotels that do not have existing improvements to the roof have elevator rooftop access?
I don't have the answer to that question. I would have to look into that.
Because that determines the number of hotels we're talking about.
In talking to some of the hotel operators, we talked to about 10 of them prior to this, and a number of them already do have hotel activities on their rooftop. And a couple of them, especially in residential zones, don't have the capacity for it, and they acknowledge that due to the structure of the building, and so they wouldn't be
Wouldn't
concerned
qualify.
with this. Yeah.
Okay. I think I'll leave the rest of my questions for after we have public comment.
Commissioner Matos.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple of questions for staff, just on clarification points. The staff report references West Hollywood Municipal Code Section 1980-060, specifically pertaining to revocations and modifications. It doesn't explicitly say this in the staff report, but does this provision for revocation or modification based on nuisance apply to CUPs under this proposed ZTA before us tonight?
If I'm understanding, you're asking if the revocation section would apply to any application for a rooftop?
Submitted under this proposed zone text amendment before us.
Yeah, the existing code applies to anyone, so yeah.
So, and then it references a review body subject to the findings of a review body. So meaning that the review body under that section of code would need to make a finding that either there's a nuisance or a public health risk or something to that effect. Who is the review body in that instance?
So I believe it references it's the review body who approved the original entitlement. So in this case, it would be the Planning Commission.
Okay, so in the event that there was a CUP that was found to be a nuisance or was, accused of being a nuisance, the review body would come before, it would become before the planning commission for consideration of modification or revocation.
That is correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. When you had mentioned it during your staff report that CUP changes would obviously come before the body. In the event that it's a new use of the rooftop, it always comes before the planning commission for review, correct?
So
A
if we're
change to the existing CUP for a new use.
So if it's an existing CUP and they want to do a modification to it, then I think it depends on what that modification is. Let's see. Generally, it would come back to the original review body. If it's something considered minor, it may not require coming back to a public hearing. It might just be a minor amendment.
What would be a minor amendment?
It could be, I mean, potentially maybe just like some cosmetic changes to, you know, a building or, you know, an interior remodel, for example, may not be a major amendment to a CUP. Really things that don't really touch on the like activities might be considered minor. So it just, yeah, I think there's a variety of different options, but typically it's if it's low impact, nothing changes the findings of the original approval of the CUP, or there's no modifications to the existing conditions of approval either.
Okay, so but in the event that there is a modification to the existing CUP's activities or construction in terms of the ZTA, it would come before the Planning Commission for review at a public hearing?
I mean, typically, yes. In the hypothetical, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have someone here from the sound consultant team, Rincon?
We have them on Zoom. I believe it's Josh Carmen.
Okay, a quick question for them. Staff report references that sound barriers at 5 feet is an industry standard. Wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more as to why we may or may not think 5 feet would be sufficient for a sound barrier.
Sure. So, 5 foot, typically a minimum requirement due to typically someone's ear height. And so, I think acknowledging that we're talking at the program level, it's going to depend a lot on, the elevation of the hotel relative to, say, a residence or some other receptor. And so I think the intent was just to specify that that's the minimum. The results of a project-specific noise study could certainly require that it be higher if necessary.
Is it your opinion that a higher minimum standard, such as 6 feet, maybe a little bit taller than the average person, would be more effective at reducing potential noise intrusion from a hotel rooftop use?
It could, but I think, again, knowing that we're talking at the program level, the noise level experienced at, say, a residence or any other receptors, it's going to be a function not just of that wall height, but the elevation of the residence relative to whatever that use is on the hotel. So it certainly could be necessary to have a higher wall, but we did want to specify some minimum height. It shouldn't be any less than 5 feet.
Understood. Thank you for that.
Sure.
That will conclude my questions for now. Thank you.
Great. Commissioner Solomon, did you have questions? No? Okay. Commissioner Jones?
Yeah. Staff alluded to this when you gave the staff report, but I just want to get some clarification, and I am asking for posterity for the public record. When we're talking about rooftop structures, again, without going into discussion, I'm a little concerned that this terminology is causing some undue consternation. I'm pretty familiar with all of the hotels on this list. I've been to many of them. And, I'm looking at, say, Sunset Tower, which it's noted has a rooftop improvement of a pool, a lounge, and dining. The Sunset Tower Hotel's pool and dining is not on the roof. it's on a terrace that's at ground level with the entrance to the hotel. Same with what used to be the standard, which I don't believe is on this list and is moving through the process. I'm thinking about, the Mondrian Sky Bar. There is a restaurant on the top, on the top level, but the pool, I think, is actually down from the entrance to the hotel. So I just want to understand a little bit more about how we're defining a rooftop improvement, because it's not like, I don't foresee a situation where someone's going to be building anything at all on the rooftop of the Sunset Tower Hotel. Can you expound on that a little bit? I just want to be very clear on what the actual definition is.
So the code doesn't have a definition for rooftop, but I think there's a definition for roof line that talks about the building edge. But essentially, those types of, I guess, outdoor uses that you're talking about that may be above the ground floor but are not on the building's roof are not regulated through the ZTA. And the code section that we reference is that section that specifies the height permitted above, or projection permitted above the height limit. So that's really what we're looking to, what's at the height limit. So those activities that you were mentioning are not located at the height limit. They're probably well below it. It would be structures that are going above and beyond the height limit.
Right, which I'm just saying, like, in the case of, I'll just use Sunset Tower because it's an easy one and I know it well. There's no possible way that the dining and pool activities would go beyond rooftop level right now, or height level, because they're literally at the ground level of Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah, so that would not fall under this amendment.
Okay. Okay. I'm just not, again, I was not here for the first hearing, for the first time this was heard. I was still on maternity leave. I think it's, I'll hold my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have just one or two. First one, just to follow up on Commissioner Matos's question. So for a project that already has a CUP, it may come back to us. Just one hypothetical question. Let's say that there's a hotel that is making some modifications, but they're fairly minor. They're not adding structures, but they want to change their operating hours. Yeah. Would that come to us, or would that be at director level?
I have the code section. Yes, thank you, Chair. And I was able to pull up the code section for amendments to an approved project. The Community Development Director can determine whether a proposed change is major or minor. And it states that determination is made depending on a couple of criteria. So whether it's major depends on whether the proposal may result in significant impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, significant environmental impacts, a change to the approved use or a significant change to the project design, a change to the basis on which the environmental determination of the project was made, or a change to the basis upon which the review authority made the findings for approval of the project. And then it continues to say that a major change request will then be processed in the same manner as the original permit or entitlement. So if the Community Development Director were to find that a change in the hours of operations were going to be potentially a significant impact to the surrounding neighborhood, he could consider that major.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity. And then one other question relating to some of the questions from Commissioner Hoopengarner. So at one point in the sequencing of how this zone text ultimately came to us, and we're looking at it again, I guess there was a recommendation that this go to long-range planning. You mean long-range planning department or long-range planning subcommittee?
Subcommittee, correct.
Okay. Did it go to the long-range planning subcommittee? It did. Okay. There's just so many questions. Anyway, the other question that I have, just to kind of understand more about this, so is there a scenario where glass or something else could be not considered a structure?
Are you referring to a sound?
Like a sound barrier?
I guess I'm not sure what you're imagining.
So I guess what I'm wondering is when we're talking about roof heights, if there's a height limit, conceivably there could be use closer to or beyond the setbacks that are established if there's no structures, unless there's the sound barrier is a structure. So I'm trying to understand different scenarios in terms of how that space may be configured on a hypothetical rooftop.
Yeah, so this would not be regulating the specific use. So if there were uses unrelated to a structure, that's already regulated by the hotel CUP. If the sound barrier that is being constructed is of any building construction materials, then it's considered a structure.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So that would effectively cap the use in theory, and also that would be reviewed here by us.
It would be reviewed, yeah.
Okay. And that was the only other question I had right now. Are there any other questions from Commissioner Hoopengartner?
Sorry, yes, I do have a couple more before public comment. In the proposed amendments to the existing zoning ordinance, I'm looking at your red line on section 4B. It says hotel height and density shall be consistent with the underlying residential zoning district. That's existing code. Then it goes on to say, except for permitted projections above the height limit for hotel rooftop structures, which may exceed the height limit and FAR in permitted zones, which I'd like an explanation of, with approval of a conditional use permit. As I read this, this says a brand new construction of a hotel would automatically be entitled to this additional 15 feet of rooftop projections above and beyond what they are otherwise entitled to just because this code exists. Is that correct? Or I'm having a hard time reading this and understanding it.
It would always be subject to the CUP. So the code section that does allow for projections above the height gives the planner guidance as to what to permit. And so if the findings can be made and conditions are placed on it, then they can recommend approval. And the commission at that point can also approve that project, or they could condition it otherwise.
But this is under the development standards. This is the straight up 1936.150 development standards for new developments. This is not for supplemental CUP anything.
It still requires a CUP.
But it would require a CUP on a new project, and it would say, oh, yes, you're entitled to 45 feet, but because of this code, you can also get another 15 feet for your rooftop projections because of this code. Am I reading that correctly?
That's correct, but again, the commission could always condition something otherwise. There could be a study that gives guidance to something other than allowing for that.
But I would see many a developer coming through saying, oh, it's here in the code. I can have this 15 feet in addition to my 45 feet. I don't know what legal has to say about this, but I'm having a hard time reading that and seeing anything different.
Yeah, and that additional 15 feet is not like an entire new story. So it does limit it to just a particular amount, a percentage of the roof line, right, or of the rooftop. So they would be able to, add an additional 15 feet within that 50-foot or 50%, rooftop area.
But then we're right back to, the original discussion. This was meant as a resolution to help existing buildings with existing problems to improve their viability thanks to COVID. And now we're saying, oh, by the way, if you have a new project, you get it too. Is that correct?
Commissioner Hoopengartner, I believe, or at least the way legal reads this, is that if a new construction application came forward and it wanted a permitted height, hotel height above what's allowed in the zone, it would require its own conditional use permit findings. So those would come as part of the larger package to Planning Commission, but it would be its own CUP as part of the larger set of entitlements.
A separate CUP from the original
Correct.
entitlement?
as part of the package
As
of
part
its
of-
new
so it
construction,
would-
but its own CUP findings.
Okay, so in short, it's meant for new projects to go ahead and have another 15 feet.
Unless the commission denies it.
Okay, thank you.
It would, sorry, one point of clarification. It would function like any other project that also requires a CUP based on the specific conditional use. So the commission would consider it along with the other menu of discretionary entitlements that may be necessary.
Okay. And can you explain the in permitted zones?
So that was just to specify that these are for the hotels, where they're permitted. So obviously they have to have entitlements and be permitted. So it's just saying if a hotel is permitted in that zone and it is allowed, then these regulations apply. There could be some specific zone where a hotel may not be allowed. If it's redundant, it's also something that could be removed.
Well, it's interesting because hotels aren't permitted in residential zones.
Right.
So all of our existing residential projects are non-conforming. So in order to do this, it needs to be in a permitted zone, and they're not in permitted zones.
So they are permitted with their existing CUPs.
But it's not
But
a
again,
permitted zone. The
if
zone
that's-
itself
If that's language,
is an R4 zone or an R3 zone. It's
If
not
that's-
a permitted use in those zones.
if that's language you'd like to recommend changing, we can look at that.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question. Just making sure that I understand when we're talking about projections. So if there's a rooftop structure up to 15 feet and there's HVAC equipment, that's not usually counted in the overall height, but the maximum height is up to the rooftop. Now we're saying 15 feet above the rooftop. So what happens for those other utilitarian type projections? Would that be excluded since you've already exceeded the rooftop or maximum height allowed on a structure? Or would it depend on whether or not the building has already reached the height limit? Do you see what I'm saying? So let's say that the height limit is 50 feet, and then you have a 15-foot structure or 12-foot structure, and then you're putting HVAC and PV on top of that structure that sits on the roof. You've now gone even beyond that height, but it could be argued that it's service type equipment, which is something that's common to be on rooftops. Is that allowed? Would that be allowed, or how?
That's already permitted under that same section, so projections allowed above the rooftop.
Above the rooftop,
Yeah.
but not above the structure.
No, no,
So then it would not be allowed.
not on top of the structure itself. It'd be allowed on the roof, which is already something that's in the code we're not changing.
It would not be allowed on this new structure, though, if it exceeded that 15-foot line.
Correct.
How about if the building is 20 feet short of the allowable height limit in that zone, and then they want to put a 15-foot structure on top? Are they allowed to put this equipment on top of this new structure?
As long as they're staying under, whatever the height allowed for that structure is, then yeah.
Okay, because I think our code says something about allowable projections above a rooftop, regardless of what the allowable height is. So that's why I'm wondering. This has come up before in some projects. And maybe you might need to look into that a little bit. But for example, a parapet wall, but you can't just build random things on roofs. Does that make sense? Regardless of whether or not you're within the height limit.
I can pull up that section. But just responding back to the question about hotels in residential zones, they are permitted with a CUP. So I believe that's covered under the code.
And also on that note, where there are hotels in residential zones, don't they have a zone overlay? They're an overlay zone within our zoning districts, right?
Can you repeat the question?
The question is, if we have a hotel in a residential zone that predates the city, right, and is allowed by a CUP, that's actually an overlay zone, correct? So
No.
no. Okay.
No, yeah, it's just a permit, yeah.
Okay.
To be clear, we don't have those hotels predating the city. Those were approved once we became a city.
Of course.
Those were existing.
Yeah, they're kind of legal
Yeah.
non-conforming.
They were existing apartment buildings. There were
Okay.
481 apartments converted to hotel rooms in 1989.
Yes, and there's no overlay zone associated with those. No, okay, thank you.
And I can go back to your question about the projections above the height. Again, so that table is in section 19.20.080, height and measurement exceptions, which is where we're adding this. That is where you'll see the allowable projections above height for things like mechanical equipment, non-occupiable features, elevator shafts, all of those.
Could you please restate that section?
19.20.080.
Thank you.
Yeah, and most of those additional allowances are stated above the roof line of the existing structure.
Okay, and roof line would still be the roof line regardless of these other structures?
No, I would say that it's of the roof line, the existing roof line.
The existing, correct, not the
Right.
new.
So you wouldn't be allowed another 10 feet above, a 15-foot,
Okay.
hotel projection. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Okay, then we will move on to public comments. I believe we have at least one public commenter today.
Correct, Chair. We have one public speaker here in chambers, and we have a few on the Zoom platform. So we'll cover the council chambers first. Our first public speaker, Juan. You have 3 minutes. Please state your name and city of residence.
Sure. Juan Muñoz Guevara. Good evening, Honorable Chair Lombardi and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Juan Muñoz Guevara, and I'm a political coordinator with Unite Here Local 11, the Hospitality Workers Union. On behalf of
City of residence?
Los Angeles.
Thank you.
On behalf of our 32,000 hospitality workers, I am here to express our strong opposition to the zone text amendment before the Commission tonight. We believe this is a giveaway to the hotel industry at the expense of sufficient public input for two reasons. First, there is already a process by which hotels can expand rooftop amenities by seeking a variance. A variance requires appropriately rigorous findings compared to those in the proposed CUP process. Second, the proposed ZTA includes even less public information and fewer topics for public input than the ZTA proposed in June by eliminating the noise study requirement and potentially reducing the required amount of green space. The previous version required a noise study in many instances, but now staff is proposing that the director can unilaterally decide whether a noise study is required or not. While the previous version required 10% of occupiable rooftop spaces to be landscaped, the current version removes this language and now requires landscape along frontage only if it is adjacent to a residential zone, without any realistic avenue for the public to request more landscaping. For these reasons, we respectfully request that the Commission reject the proposed ZTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. And that is our last public speaker here in chambers. I'll turn it over to Zoom. For those on the Zoom platform that would like to speak, please *6 for me if you're calling in, or raise your hand in the Zoom platform.
All right, we will start with Roxanne. Please state your name and city of residence, and you will have 3 minutes. Thank you. And then *6 to unmute.
Hello? Can you hear us? David, do we want to move on to another?
Can hear her.
Hello?
Oh,
Hello.
hello? We can hear you now.
Sorry about this, guys. Can you hear me? Oh, great, thank you. Hi, my name is Roxanne. I grew up on Clark Street, now known as North Clark Street, directly in front of, not in the back of 8850 Sunset Boulevard. We live in a 20-unit building that is already affordable, that already has affordable units. Next to us is another 16 to 20 unit building that's affordable. We oppose 10A, and jumping ahead, at least we oppose 10A at the development that might happen at 8850 Sunset Boulevard location.
What are you talking
Our
about?
lives will be, I'm sorry? Hello?
Please continue. I'm not sure what that was. We'll reset some time if necessary.
Okay, let me finish and then you'll know what I'm saying. Okay, please oppose 10A, jumping ahead of 8850 Sunset Boulevard location. Our lives will be absolutely disrupted. Let us start with some of the reasons for our opposing. Our windows will be directly across there, sacrificing privacy, peace of mind, and our quality of life. This building we live in also houses disabled veterans, by the way. The noise and disruptions it'll cause will be unimaginable. We don't need an expensive noise consultation to know how noisy it'll be, and welcome and invite anyone from the commission over to our home to evaluate so. It is disheartening how 3 of the 4 commissioners hastily approved the 8850 Sunset Boulevard development that sparked, to my knowledge, this whole action and discussion of 10A. At this moment, I want to express my gratitude to Commissioner Hoopengardner for the consistent integrity and being detail-oriented. This area, 8850 Sunset Boulevard in particular, is too dangerous and too crowded. The power grid seems already taxed as it is with frequent power outages we already go through. This project caused yet another community issue, asking for more height and rooftop amenities, taking advantage of the state's mandate of affordable housing, to my knowledge. Perhaps a location like Crescent Heights and Sunset Boulevard will be a better location for this impressive development. It's not as crowded, and Sunset and Crescent Heights is nothing but a pile of dirt and looks available to us. For all requests and for added heights and rooftop amenities, every location should be looked at on a case-to-case basis. By the way, I don't know if notices were supposed to be sent out for today's public hearing by snail mail, but we never got a notice. This concludes my comments, and I appreciate all of your hard work. Thank you and have a good evening.
Roxana,
Thank you, Roxana.
I had trouble hearing you. Could you just restate your city of residence?
West Hollywood.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker will be Jordan,
1114
followed by Genevieve. Jordan, go ahead and *6 to unmute yourself. And please state your name and city of residence, please.
Sorry, can you repeat the name?
Jordan.
Jordan Session. All right, we'll move on. Genevieve, if you could *6 to unmute yourself, state your name and city of residence, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Me all right? Okay. Evening, Chair Lombardi and Commissioners. Genevieve Morrill, President and CEO for the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. Staff has it right. This allows and ensures a formal process and a better integration of resident concerns in terms of noise and privacy. This has a consistent set of regulations and conditions the hotel must meet, and you also get to further condition it when they come before you again. This allows hotels to enhance, to attract more business, but also provides the ability to make changes to address these same concerns of noise and privacy. This is definitely a proposal to help address issues already existing, not new issues by raising the height. In fact, it's just the opposite. Let's think about the rationale behind this and take into account the issues the residents are facing caused by activity on the hotel rooftops. I would suggest that the reason so many residents are concerned is due to existing issues and feel these would be exacerbated by the proposal, but it is our belief, aligned with the city's recommendations and noise study, that this is actually the solution. The problem actually already exists. Rooftop experiences are a major attraction for West Hollywood. Our #1 economic feeder is tourism. We must continue to expand and allow our local and regional markets to thrive. This has so many positive solutions to an existing issue. Please see the logic of this, and we commend staff for making this a clear solution for a critical issue that also fosters a vibrant urban environment. If you look at the before and after pictures for what this does, it absolutely shows improvement. This will address the concerns raised. They're still subject to major conditions, noise, ordinance, and regulations. There are things in place to protect the residents and allow commercial venue the ability to operate fully. I do not understand Labor's opposition to a proposal. They're claiming landscaping. This is ridiculous. This helps workers get more hours and more shifts, and it helps everyone thrive, including employees. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Adam Darvich. Please *6 to unmute. State your name and city of residence. Thank you.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much. Good evening, Chair Lombardi and Vice Chair Gregoire and commissioners. I wanted to take a second to congratulate Commissioner Lynn Hoffen-Garner for coming back to this commission, one that I always admired and looked up to, and was disappointed as an individual with a Persian background for her to be asked to leave the commission. I'm glad that you're back, and just to let you know, I was not offended by your comment. That's a reality about Persian weddings. But I wanted to talk about this item 10A. I think some of you have heard me out loud 2 years ago when I was really involved in calling in, asking for your help for more restrictions. The incident that I had that almost ended my life was from London Hotel, from rooftop bar at the time of stay-at-home order. Nobody was really looking to see what customers are going into the hotel. So they had a visitor from New York, a felon just released from federal prison, was able to go to rooftop and do drug dealing, and then got in his car after bar closed and rammed into my property at over 100 miles per hour. So the reason I point this out, because no matter how many ordinances, how many guidelines we have, you really need to look at what our city can do to really apply those rules. In my case, none of those were applied. And a visitor from out of town coming to our residential areas do not know our streets, do not know our culture, does not know, what the streets are, what signs are coming up. So just wanted to point that out, that having all the rules and restrictions doesn't mean anything to me as a resident that almost lost his life. But I appreciate the discussion. I got more confused as I listened. I still don't know who's pushing this agenda to bring in more amenities into our streets. The noise level is already up on the streets. If you all come to Larrabee and Cynthia at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. on a Saturday night or weekend night, you can enjoy all the noise that you want. The people that are customers from the bars, rooftop bars, coming to our neighborhood for Uber and Lyft, and the city is not regulating and not really restricting the activities. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Adam. Next speaker will be Susanna. Please *6 to unmute yourself. State your name and city of residence, please.
At *6ing, I'm joining on Zoom. Is that correct? And can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Good evening again, Commissioners. Susanna Lagudis, West Hollywood. First, I have to say there's so many serious issues related to development and construction in our city, and I'm disappointed and truthfully I'm angry that so much precious staff, public and commission time and energy has been spent and in my mind wasted on this item when we are still, just as one example, allowing wanton, irresponsible, wasteful and damaging dewatering in existing and future projects all over our city. Staff have repeated that this item is solely about allowing hotels to build additional structures on their rooftop, not about increasing the types of activities allowed on these rooftops through their CPUs. So I'm confused because if they add additional structure, these structures would of course be designed for specific activities beyond those that they are currently permitted for. And they would be able to apply for an amendment to their existing structure, to their existing CPU to add in the activity related to this structure. For example, if a hotel in my neighborhood's case, the private club Soho House West, wanted to put up a movie screen so they could conduct movie nights for their members, they would be able to apply for an amendment to their existing CUP. And it appears that there's a possibility that the planning department would approve this ministerially without input from the impacted public and without having to go through the planning commission. And if it does go to the commission, then the public needs to be vigilant and invest time and energy all over again to contest this additional activity, prove how disruptive it is, prove what a nuisance it is. It's exhausting. So those are my comments on this evening. I appreciate the commissioner's questions to staff, and also I hope that you will just quit letting everybody's time be wasted on what I consider to be frivolous compared to the really serious issues that we're facing in our city that the Planning Commission can handle and deal with. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you. Jordan, go ahead and star 6 to unmute yourself. State your name and city of residence, please. Jordan, go ahead and speak.
If necessary, we could reopen the public portion of the hearing if Jordan gets back, correct?
Yeah, I have a few names to read into the record, so we can go back and...
I'm Jordan speaking. I'm speaking right now. Can you hear me, Commissioner?
Okay, yes, we can. Go ahead, Jordan.
Jordan Sisson speaking. Yes, apologies. Jordan Sisson. I live in Riverside, speaking on behalf of United Here, who has many members who live and work in West Hollywood. I first want to thank the commissioners for asking some really important questions. At the top of the point I would like to make is that this is really a staff solution to a problem that no longer exists. Second point I wanted to raise is that I think it's very important to ask what were the changes made from the June version to the current version. And I think if you look at them, it makes it very clear that they're trying to put more discretion at the staff and the director level and actually left power to the Planning Commission. I want to raise a couple of few points. If you look at some of the changes between the last 2 months, they've stricken any mention of use. Now, there's some suggestion that would automatically go to Planning Commission, but as you heard, that's really up to the director to determine whether or not that's a minor or major significant change. If it's minor, it doesn't necessarily go to the Planning Commission. Second, at the last meeting, there was significant concerns about noise, and it was rest assured to the entire commission that, hey, there will be a noise study. However, if you look at the changes that have been made, before the code said noise studies would be required. Now that decision is entirely up to the director. Respectfully, if you look at the changes, they really do put less obligation on hotel operators and less protection. And so again, the code makes it very clear what is required and what's not required. It's not codified, but saying that a change of use or a potential use associated with a height extension of a screen or of any other sort of height leniency, that does not necessarily mean that it's going to come back to you. Of course, if you put a structure, it serves a use, and that use does not necessarily go before you. And so again, I think if you look at this at the totality of the circumstances, this puts more power at the staff level than the Planning Commission. Interesting enough, at the last Planning Commission, a lot of concerns were raised about noise and how fact-specific those noise studies have to be. Was there any requirement to say flat out that a noise study would be required as part of a application? No, that's been removed. Unfortunately, throughout the changes that have been made have always gone one way, to make it less protective than more protective. We respectfully request you to deny this DTA. Again, it's a solution to a problem that no longer exists. I thank you for your time. and I wish you the best in your decision making. Thank you.
Okay, and that was our last public speaker on Zoom. I do have a citizen's comment slip to read into the record, and there are a couple people that came in after the deadline, so you did not get a copy of their correspondence.
Okay.
Emma Stone opposes staff's recommendation. She's West Hollywood. Francis Donnelly, West Hollywood, is writing to urge you to deny the zone text amendment. Julian Jagoda, West Hollywood, is urging you to deny the proposed zone text amendment. Justine. And Burton Kahaski, West Hollywood, is writing to encourage you to approve the amendment allowing additional height on hotels. And that's all we have for public comments at this time.
Thank you. For Justine, you said, what was the position? Approve.
Justine is urging you to deny the proposed zone text amendment.
Thank you. I thought so too. Let me just ask quickly, does anyone want to take a brief break now, or should we go back to questions of staff? Okay, this is really fast. Thank you. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, are we ready? Thank you. Let's restart this meeting. So before we close the public comment portion of the hearing, are there any follow-up questions for staff? I know I have a couple. Seems like a few of us do. Anyone? Commissioner Carvalero, would you like to go first?
We didn't actually do disclosures. I mean, you asked, but
I
don't know
did
if we got
ask for
responses.
disclosures. It's a good point. If anyone would like to do disclosures, maybe now is fine. Yeah.
Do we do disclosures for items brought by staff?
I think it's at the discretion of the commission. I think in recent history, sometimes there'll be discussion, but ultimately call the commission.
Yeah. I prefer to ask, and it did, but if anyone wants to get it out now, I know we kind of jumped into questions. I'll just go left to right then, Commissioner Matos.
I spoke with members of the public pertaining to matters in the staff report and residents of the city as well.
I same disclosures here. And Commissioner Solomon?
Same. I spoke to members of the public about items in the staff report.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, questions of staff. Are there additional questions of staff? I have some. Commissioner Carvalero has some. Maybe we'll let Commissioner Carvalero go first.
Okay. I'm going to repeat. There's a lot of noise associated with the ZTA, and I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly. We confirmed earlier that for every 12 inches of height above the roof deck, you have to have a setback of 18 inches. So if you go 15 feet, it's going to be a 22-foot 6-inch setback, which can be landscaped.
Which can be what? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Yeah, I didn't hear the last part of that.
Which can be landscaped if they choose. Yeah. Okay, so a sound study is required during design development, and then a sound test is required to ensure that everything's working before the permit and the COP are issued.
That's correct. If a sound study is required, yes.
Okay, and there's also a neighborhood meeting during the initial process.
That is correct.
Okay, so and every project of this nature will come to PC for review.
Yes, every project will come to Planning Commission. Yes.
Okay, are we only asking questions, or can I make comments?
Just questions right now.
Great, that's it, thank you.
Commissioner Matos?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on a, thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up on a point that Commissioner Caballero just brought up. Sound study, you said, if it's required. What is that at the discretion of the community development director?
Yes, that's the discretion of the director.
What was the thinking behind that?
So the thinking behind that is that there could be situations, we can't account for every potential scenario. There could be a situation where maybe a sound study is not required, and that would be up to the discretion of the director. However, these projects, again, would be coming to the Planning Commission, so the Commission also has the discretion at that point to require a sound study, even if one had not been previously required.
Got it. So it would be at the discretion of the community development director if other direction had not been given by the Planning Commission.
Well, the application process would go through the director first,
Okay.
And then come to the Planning Commission.
At the point that it comes to the Planning Commission, would that impact the timeline to impose a sound study at that point? Or would it be a more opportune time for it to be on the front end of the project when the application comes forward?
So if it came to the Commission and the Commission wanted to recommend additional studies, then yeah, that would impact the timeline of the project.
Okay. So it'd be more beneficial to actually have it on the onset?
Well, beneficial to who, I guess, depends on
the process.
So I guess it depends on what you want out of that process.
Okay, thank you.
So in regard,
Commissioner Hoopengartner?
No. So in regard to that sound study, when I asked the question before, I asked if it was required during design development. It's at the director's choice whether it's required. But if it comes to PC, and we think that it does require a sound study, then we can send the project back regardless of where it is in the process, and it will just get delayed. We won't have pressure from staff to move it forward because it's so up against the deadline.
Commission, as my understanding, always has discretion to request any additional information or any additional studies that might be needed for a project.
Okay, great, thank you, sorry.
No, you're good.
To follow up on that, what if it's part of an Affordable Housing Act project? So if actually someone just brought up, now that I think about it, the Viper Room project. It's half hotel, half housing, and they want the 15 feet. Now we're, so what rules?
So we will probably not discuss every potential scenario that might come to the commission, but again, the director does have that discretion. So if it is a project that potentially has a substantial impact, that's the director's discretion to determine. And again, there's that code section that kind of explains what may constitute a significant impact, but the director still has discretion even if it doesn't fall under one of those items.
And is there a reason we didn't just say it's mandatory?
Because we can't account for every scenario, so it's to allow for the process to actually play out.
Yeah, but wouldn't you have the possibility to say it's mandatory, but then in the review say there's no impacts done?
Well, that would still...
Yeah, but I was going to say, because there may be some instances where the structure is just so minor that it may not require like a noise study. If they're really just building, some sort of canopy or shade structure, that really may not, require, mind you, we're not talking about the activities, we're just talking about the actual structure itself, that, maybe a noise study may not be required for that particular scenario. We can definitely require it, it just may be just additional, processing and cost to the applicant, but it's up to the discretion of the commission. We just thought that there may be cases where it just may be so minor that not to require one. So we just kind of providing that as an alternative.
Okay. I have thoughts, but they're not questions.
I do have more questions.
Do you have more? Okay. Do you want to continue your questions? And then I think there's more on the left here too.
I'm going to skip around a little bit, but can you define the difference between plainly audible and audible?
So we do have code enforcement staff here. If you would like to direct the question to them,
sure.
I'll invite them to come and speak to that. That is something from our noise ordinance.
Hi, good evening. This is Jessica Benitez, Code Enforcement Supervisor. Plainly audible means that you're able to hear it from residential area or from wherever. If it's a commercial noise that we're responding, Code Enforcement will respond, and if we're able to hear it and track the noise from the source, then we notify the property owner, the business owner, that they need to lower the music.
So that's any level of audibility?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That's any level of audibility?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So since we have code enforcement here, can you tell me how many times in the past 2 years you have responded to noise complaints in these existing hotel rooftops?
I have the data from 2023 to say that our division received 487 noise complaints from commercial establishments, and out of the 487%, only 2% of the complaints were from rooftops.
From hotel rooftops?
Correct. That was a total of 11 complaints, and there were 4 hotels that are associated with these complaints.
Okay. And did you ever have occasion to shut down any events?
No.
Okay. Moving on to the actual proposed text. In item 2C, this is about required findings, and it says the proposed projection will not significantly alter the architectural character of the existing property. What's significant and who's significant, defining significantly?
So when we talk about the architectural character, I think there's some language around making sure that it's consistent with the overall structure. And so in terms of looking at massing and scale and materials that are used, making sure that it's consistent with that design. This is a finding, so this is something that uses a level of discretion. That's why it was moved to findings. It's not an objective standard. It actually allows the planner to use discretion to determine that.
So
And the commission as well.
Okay, that was my next question. The commission would make that significant finding. Okay.
Correct.
That matters because one man's significant is another man's, I don't see any difference. So, okay, thank you. Item, okay, we talked about independence. Item 6C2, noise barriers of at least 5 feet in height or a different height determined by the noise study. Is there a reason that this doesn't say, but not less than 5 feet? Is there a scenario where a noise study could come by and say, oh, you only need a noise barrier of 3 feet? And that would be okay under this language, or is that an actual minimum of 5 feet?
Sorry, Commissioner Hoopengartner, could you repeat the section where you're looking?
6.
Section 6?
Section 6, under development standards, C, noise reduction measures, little 2I, noise barriers of at least 5 feet in height or a different height determined by the noise study. So my question is, this doesn't imply that it says at least 5 feet or a different height determined by the noise study. So if some independent noise studyist came through and said, oh, you only need a 3-foot height, under this language, it seems that would be acceptable. Is that correct?
So no, that wasn't the intention. That's why it says at least 5 feet. But if it would be preferable to include some clarification there, we can add that.
I would believe so because that word or seems to imply you could do either or. And that gives me the iggly-gigglies. Okay. I will put a big fix next to that one. And then moving on down to number 3, talking about amplified sound. The last sentence says, prior to the public hearing, the applicant shall perform a system check along with city's code enforcement staff, yada, yada, yada. How is that possible if the construction hasn't been done, the walls haven't been built? How do you do that system check prior to the hearing?
So the system check would be just around where the proposed operation would be.
But if the system hasn't been installed because it hasn't been approved, how would you do that system check prior to, I'm assuming, prior to the public hearing? I mean, the walls haven't been built, the system hasn't been installed, nothing's been done, and you're going to do a system check? I mean, what, are you going to bring in a couple of amps and, turn it on? I mean, how does that work?
I think there was some other language before that was changed to prior to the hearing, so we can make a correction there.
Okay. Moving on to number 4. We've just determined that the minimum height should be 5 feet on our sound barrier, but now this is saying that the speakers can be put at that 5-foot height level. So we're now saying that the speakers can actually be put right at the same level as the sound barrier, and potentially having the sound escape over the barrier. Can you explain the rationale for this?
So that's where project-specific noise study would come into play to account for the individualized scenarios. So if a specific project has speakers at 5 feet, then the noise study would be the determinant. You know, someone would do that analysis to figure out how high the barrier needs to be in that case.
So this is saying that the maximum height you could put the speakers is 5 feet, but
Correct.
theoretically the noise study would come back and say, if you do that, then the sound barriers need to be 7 feet or some such.
Yeah, or the noise study could also require the speakers be at a lower height than 5 feet.
I just don't feel very comfortable with saying that it can be 5 feet tall without, you know, because it says here that and pointed downward in a way, but it doesn't say anything about requiring that the sound wall be commensurate with that.
Another option could be to put the speakers a maximum of 3 feet, which would be like a table level.
Mm-hmm. That would make more sense to me. Now, if you've got a minimum height of 5 feet on the wall, then you have a maximum height of 3 feet on the speakers. Now you're doing the job. Okay. Okay, it's me, so we got to talk about the landscaping. Can you explain using native or non-invasive plants? What does that mean?
That means plants native to the area or non-invasive, meaning plants that won't pose a risk to the existing plant life.
But that just means you can plant anything as long as it's not invasive. It doesn't, the native is kind of meaningless.
No, it can be native or non-invasive. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
A non-invasive plant could be anything,
right,
okay, that's not native.
Right. But it could also be native.
So basically, you're saying a native plant is a native plant. Requiring native plants is a whole thing, okay? It's all, we've had this conversation many times in many places. That's a thing, okay? That's different than saying non-invasive plants. First of all, by definition, most native plants are non-invasive because they're native, okay? This is saying you can plant anything you want as long as it's non-invasive.
Or native, and this gives applicants a choice between that. This is not uncommon language.
It's not an either
for
or is what
landscaping.
I'm saying to you. It's not an either or thing.
Maybe
the
some of this
commission
is
would
for
like to
deliberation.
recommend
If we just
something different.
hear the questions of staff, and then if we can always ask further questions of staff during that deliberation.
I'm trying to understand what your thinking is behind it because it doesn't make any sense.
This is typical language for landscaping requirements, and our urban designer did also review this.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain why you chose to decrease the green space requirements?
So at the last public hearing, there was a question regarding the landscaping requirements that were previously proposed and the request to make them consistent with the existing code. So we actually went back, looked at the existing code, chapter 19.26 landscaping standards. A lot of those standards apply to development that's at the ground level, but we adapted that for rooftop, so that's where that language is pulled from. The request was from the commission to make that language consistent.
Do you remember that? I don't remember that. Okay.
What's the question? I don't wanna...
We said to decrease the landscaping
The
requirements.
request was to make the landscaping requirements consistent with what's existing in the code.
Okay, we can probably talk about that
Yeah,
during deliberation.
okay. Right, okay. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask a quick question because I got confused now. So you just said that an urban designer reviewed the landscaping requirements. Which urban designer? Who?
The West Hollywood urban designer within our current planning and historic preservation section division.
Garen, yeah.
Was that Garen?
Garen, correct.
Because I thought I asked that question in the last meeting. Did I not? So now I'm confused.
There's been a little bit of reorganization, so.
So wait,
yeah, but this is in the past.
What's the question, Commissioner?
If UDAS reviewed this or not.
So UDAS reviewed the initial pass that we brought forth. Since then, we've now transitioned to review of all land use entitlement and policy proposals by the urban designer, which is different than UDAS. And that's the urban designer that's currently in the community development department.
Who reviewed this?
So our urban designer, Garen Yolis.
Okay.
There was some, yeah.
Oh, okay. Questions over to my left? Commissioner Carvalero.
Okay, another clarification, because I interpreted this differently than Commissioner Hoopengardner did, but on page 8 of 10, prior to permit issuance or approval conditional use permit modification by the Planning Commission, the applicant shall perform a system check along with the city's neighborhood and business staff, safety staff. To me, that means the rooftop is built out, and then they're running an actual test, and if it fails, they make the modifications that they need to make to the physical barriers or whatever it may be. Is that correct?
Can you go back to the section that you were referencing?
Yes, the bottom of page 8 of 10 in your staff report, prior to permit issuance or approval of conditional use permit. To me, that means after everything's built, then you do a sound test to make sure it actually works. So it's not a hypothetical. The hypothetical is done during design development. This is an actual test of the actual build out.
Yeah, and we can make it clear in the language itself. So we can say that prior to the operation of the proposed use in a rooftop structure, conduct the study. So we can just make it a little bit more clear, so it's not so there's not a.
But the actual text says prior to the public hearing.
Correct. Yeah, that's what we're saying is that maybe we need to just clarify that so it's not
Take
so it's
that
more
part
specific
out.
to once it's actually
Yeah, because
constructed.
I think the staff report is a little different than the actual text, and that's why I asked the question.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
that was
thank
the question
you. Yeah.
that I was referring to.
Thank you. Commissioner Matos, did you have questions? I just see that you pressed the button. All done?
My apologies.
No,
I'm good for now. Thank you.
I never cleared it. Commissioner Gregoire? Commissioner Solomon?
Two quick questions. How much does a noise study cost?
How much does a noise study cost, you said?
Generally, just best guess, how much does a noise study cost?
I don't think we have those numbers, but possibly our consultant might be able to answer that question. They're on Zoom. I'm not sure if Josh would like to respond to that.
How much does he charge?
He's trying to speak.
Oh, one second, Josh. I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Hi, Josh.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it would depend on the project details. If I had to say ballpark, it could probably be somewhere around $7,000, $8,000, maybe $10,000. It really depends. So I hate to throw out a number because it's all a little hypothetical.
Okay, great. Thank you. My other question is related to the setback requirement. In the example earlier, 15 feet 22 and a half foot setback, is that 22 and a half foot setback, is that completely dead space? Can that space like also be used for, say, landscaping, or is it nothing permitted there?
No, it can be used for anything else, furniture. As long as it's a permitted activity at the rooftop, it should be fine.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you.
So can they have dancing in that setback?
Can they have dancing?
Could they have a dance floor there?
If that's a permitted use at their rooftop with their existing CUP, right? We're not talking about the activity. We're just talking about just the structure. Any activity that they're allowed to have at the rooftop, as long as the structure does not, impede on that or add any additional, no additional activities will be added with the rooftop projection.
The way I was thinking about setback, though, was that no one.
It's not a dead space. You can use that for, if you want to program it or landscape it or.
Yeah, landscape is one thing, but if you put 100 people out there dancing, it's going to be a different effect on the noise. And if the barrier is behind you, then what's keeping the noise from going into the neighborhood?
Exactly. Back to my original question of where is that wall vis-a-vis the 22 feet?
But they clarified that it was at the setback. But if you can use that setback for a dance floor,
then you've got to have another sound wall.
Having the sound wall on the inside, it should be on the outside.
So the commission.
Should we condition the setback to not have people aren't allowed in the setback? You can have landscaping, but you can't have patrons go into that area because it's a buffer, a sound buffer, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're talking about noise on the other side of the noise barrier, which is just counterintuitive. I mean, it just makes no sense.
The commission could condition that. You could consider that for individual projects as well. There could be a rooftop, for example, that maybe has a pool deck that's already in that space. So you couldn't take that away from them.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
I think that needs definitely some clarification. Thank you.
Other questions? I have some questions. Okay. Okay. So I'm curious where the 15-foot height came from in terms of the maximum height, because that's more, well, I know that there's need for structure, et cetera, but that's a lot of height.
So we did look at surrounding jurisdictions to kind of see what they were doing, and a couple of them did look at 15 feet. We looked at City of Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, specifically for like rooftop dining or some type of activity on the rooftop. But also additionally in our current code for projections that are currently permitted above the height limit, that 15 feet is the maximum, and that's for elevator shafts. So we went in alignment with that as well.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for pointing out section 19.20.80 in the code earlier, which you just referenced. So I'm looking at that, and in most of the maximum vertical projections are noted as above the roof line. So we know what the definition of the roof line is. I think that's static in terms of anything that would be part of the CUP or additional structure. There are some notes, though, about sustainable energy equipment located on a rooftop, and it says that that can be 12 feet above the height limit, not the roof line. So then there's some reference to solar access and solar equipment, but it's a long portion of the code, and I haven't been able to digest it while seated here just now. So I'm just wondering if there's something here that needs to be clarified or could be clarified in this zone text as well.
Yep. We've discussed clarification there.
Okay, thank you. I saw that there were some requirements relating to light trespass and maximum illumination, but I guess I'm wondering, because we've seen some of this before, well, what if there's a billboard project? How does that come into play with these standards? because you won't be able to meet these standards if there's a billboard.
So so we're saying like there's a billboard at the rooftop of a hotel already existing,
Or even not at the rooftop.
Yeah, I guess.
Talking about existing.
About existing.
Oh,
Yeah.
so for existing billboards, that's outside of the scope of this.
Okay, so it would just be because there's a development agreement, that's how that would all be addressed? Is that what you're saying? If it's a new billboard versus an existing billboard or digital signage? Trying to understand, you've got now added height and now projects that we see that are putting billboards or signage on their structures. How do these play with each other in terms of our code?
Yeah.
Did you consider that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's specific regulations for billboards that I think are associated with that. We wouldn't want to, impede on any of those development standards. I think cumulatively, we could, we probably wouldn't take a look at the billboard, since that's probably going to be at a higher elimination than any of these rooftops. I think what we're trying to say is like, for these particular, potential rooftop projections, that these in and of itself do not, emit more light than would be an impact to a neighbor.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I guess that's helpful.
Chair Lombardi, I was just going to say too, I think a development agreement is a legislative act as well, so it would be a little bit different, and it may be hard to kind of do the hypothetical just because it is a distinguishable process that would go up by ordinance to the city council ultimately.
Okay.
And could be subject to referendum.
And then I have a question. I think I know it's in the staff report, and I think I also saw it in the zone text amendments. There's reference to a term called sound blankets. And this may be a question for the consultant. But what is a sound blanket? What does it look like? It doesn't sound like a visually appealing thing to be on a roof.
Where are you seeing that?
Let me look.
I will, ask our consultant to respond to that, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Yes. So a sound blanket would be an absorptive material that you would hang typically on the project side of a barrier. So it would add some extra sound absorption. Does that make sense?
I had trouble hearing you. I've been having trouble hearing all day today. Maybe it's me. I didn't catch the very first part. A sound blanket is, what is it?
Absorptive material that you
Okay.
would typically place on the project side of the sound barrier as opposed to on the outside. So it would add some additional absorption, sound absorption.
Okay.
That's what a sound blanket is.
So typically, what would that be for like a sports court?
Yeah, you could think of it as something that might be used for pickleball, for example. Something that you could affix to a chain link fence, or you could add to the inside or the project side of the, say a wall. So not typically something that would be visible, to say someone that's on the viewing it from outside of the project.
Okay, but it would be some sort of absorptive material, essentially. It could be.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I think that helps. And then I believe that that's just in the staff report right now. That terminology is not specifically in the resolution or the zone text, just to clarify that, because I know I stated otherwise 1 minute ago. But I just want to understand what these other noise mitigation measures may be beyond a wall or glass, so that is helpful. And I don't think I have any more questions right now. Does anyone else have questions for staff? No? Okay, then shall we move into deliberation? And we can always go back to staff if there's any questions. Commissioner Jones, would you like to go first?
Sorry, there's like my mic's not working tonight. I can't hear anything. Can everybody hear me okay, regardless of where you're sitting? Okay. So I was not here for the June 6th meeting. I was still out on leave following the birth of my child. But I want to walk back to something Commissioner Hoopengarner referenced earlier that I have not been able to piece together based on the materials we were provided with in the initial staff report tonight that was part of our packet, and then the staff memoranda that followed. The origin of this just seems murky to me. Like, it looks like Councilmember Heilman had proposed a number of different measures to mitigate for economic turbulence and volatility and problems during the COVID pandemic. And I'm not seeing in here, and I'm not calling anyone to the mat, I just want to understand the intent. I'm not seeing in here anything that this doesn't seem related to that to me at all. And I also want to make sure, as is my way, that I am making a consideration that is within the framework of what we are being asked to do. But it just seems like the biggest question for me right now is like, what does this have to do with kind of what council directed, and what benefit does this provide that like hotels in West Hollywood aren't already able to give? Like, I've been to a lot of the hotels here as a guest, restaurants, whatever it may be. So I'm open to discussion on this, and certainly to kind of the merits, and this sounds really messy. There's a lot of questions that are not asked. It just seems really complicated for something that I just don't understand what the intent of it was, or from where it was born. I guess that's my biggest question right now. And again, I'm open to discussion. I'm going to say again that I was not here before. I was also not on long-range planning when this came before long-range planning subcommittee. And maybe this is neither here nor there, but to me, that is the biggest question that needs answering. And if we're going to make a recommendation to council, I think from where I stand right now, my recommendation would just be that we just don't do it, or just recommend that we wouldn't recommend a increase in height for rooftop projections. So without going into other detail, because again, there have been a lot of very salient questions and points asked, and I like to consider myself to be a reasonable person, I'm open to discussion, but I wanted to say that first because I want to make sure I understand what's happening here.
Thank you, and I've been asking the same question to myself. So I'm wondering, is your question something that you would like any information from staff on, or would you like us to potentially discuss this first if other commissioners have, or did you just want to get the question out there and move on?
It wasn't a rhetorical question, I suppose. I do really want to understand, but again, it's not accusatory. I just want to make sure I understand, because I'm having to piece together things from two different council meetings. So I'm seeing what the directive was on August 3rd, 2020. I'm seeing the kind of staff update on August 15th, 2022. There was a long-range planning meeting in February of 2023, and then it came before Planning Commission in June of this year, and then it's coming now back to us based on a bunch of questions that the commission at that time had. So I'm trying to understand and piece together at what point this became part of the conversation, because I'm not seeing anything in here that would lead me to believe that any council member, by the way, only two of whom are still even on council, but again, neither here nor there, any specific council member called out like, hey, we also want to look into a height increase for rooftop projections as a mitigation for COVID, and like to help hotels out. Again, I don't want to seem dense, but this is, to me, is an important question, and I want to make sure that I understand. So anybody who can help fill in the blanks, whether that's staff or city attorney or someone on the dais, please, but I would like to talk about this more.
Well,
I asked one question that related to this at the last Planning Commission meeting, and I noted that this topic started to get brought up during, I think, the last City Council meeting where this was discussed, and then it was stopped because it was not part of what they were discussing at the time, and they wanted to table that. So that was, as far as the discussion went, was that something else? That was all I saw. I don't know if anyone else can fill in the blanks.
Well, I think I agree 100% with Commissioner Jones, and it's why I brought up what I did at the very beginning, which is, why are we doing this? The nominal number of hotels that it seems to apply to already have rooftop projections. There's only a couple that it might apply to. And even in staff's update, it, quote, in fact, decision makers have also questioned whether the rules should be more restrictive to reduce the use of rooftops. And given that we've got, I'd lost count, 50, 60 letters, 98% of which said, oh, hell no. And then, and there's not a single hotel who's presented themselves to say, yes, this is a good thing, and here's how it would work for us, and yeah, this is of benefit to us. We've got Genevieve and the Chamber has made a generic sort of, yay, it's a business thing, let's do it. But I don't see anything that A, council directed us to do, and B, there's so many moving parts and difficulties, and given the noise impacts, I just can't see the benefit. I really can't. I mean, I'm all for helping our businesses along as much as possible, but this I just don't see as the right way to go.
Commissioner Gregoire?
From the staff report from back in, was it in June? It did say on August 15th, 2022, the City Council directed staff to explore the possibility of proceeding with a zone text amendment to allow hotel rooftop accessory uses above the height limit with the Long Range Planning Projects Subcommittee.
But I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's be clear. That was buried in a consent item that was not discussed, was not reviewed in public in any form. It was just a new item buried into a consent that said it was a, advise and update on a previous item. And so I think that's that's stretching credulity to say, oh yeah, council wanted us to do this.
It was also a recommendation of the possibility of doing it. It didn't say
council wanted to do it.
Right.
I guess I see that the council did want staff to explore this, and staff has brought us a recommendation. And look, I frequently repeat, the city council, they're the elected city council. They're really the ones accountable to the voters. My sense is staff has brought us a recommendation. I generally think it's a well-reasoned recommendation, and it keeps the Planning Commission with plenty of discretion with respect to what projects we would recommend and approve. Seems to me this is something that we should move forward to City Council, and as the elected representatives, they can choose to kill it or they can move forward with it. I don't know. I see enough here to think that this is something that council wanted staff and to look at, and they've looked at it, and let's let the elected representatives make the final decision whether this is something that they want to move forward with.
Okay. Commissioner Matos, did you want to? Commissioner Carvalero, anything on this topic, or do you want to?
I'm curious now if there is an explanation as to how we got from point A to point Z. You can't hear me? No. Oh, sorry. Okay. I'm curious now to find out how we got from point A to point Z.
Me too.
I agree with Commissioner Vice Chair Gregoire. I think there are enough provisions here that we could manage this process, but I still like to understand how this was interpreted out of the original council request.
Commissioner Jones?
Yeah, I'm completely not opposed to, figuring out how we can manage the process. I guess I am just curious as to the intent of it, because it does seem a bit as if it was born out of the ether. And I just want to understand a little bit more about and also what great benefits. I just want to understand the intent, that's all. I'm not here to make a decision, and also, this is just a recommendation we're making to council, right? I'm not making the final call, we're not making the final call.
At the end of the day here, my understanding is that our job is not to make a final decision,
Right.
given that we are selected, we're not elected.
Totally.
My understanding is that we're tasked with looking at this and having a really thoughtful discussion around what parameters need to be added if the council does decide to adopt or move forward with this. I have a lot of thoughts. I share a lot of the concerns that have been raised. I was writing down things that were said that I thought that should be addressed. I agree with Commissioner Hoopengarner that the word "or" should probably be rephrased so that it's no less than the minimum. I think that makes sense. I've said from the beginning in the last meeting that I didn't think 5 feet was sufficient for a sound barrier. And then in this meeting, when I asked our sound consultant about the sufficiency of 5 feet, they said that a 6 or 7 foot sound barrier would be more sufficient. So I don't understand why we wouldn't consider that. But I do think that there is a way for us to craft really thoughtful feedback and input that would go to the ultimate decision makers on this motion, or on this zone text amendment. That's my thought.
And I would agree, and to Commissioner Caballeros, but I think we've surfaced a lot of things. I think there's a lot of fixes we've identified, but it comes back to Commissioner Jones's point right from the get-go. We're being asked to make our recommendation to council, and the basis of that is, do we recommend this thing? Is this a good thing? Now, can it be tweaked and fixed and made better? Sure, we can do that. But at the heart of it is this in the best interest of our community? Is this in the best interest of our city? And that includes all of our city. It includes our businesses, it includes our neighbors. And I think that's the core question. And we are being asked to recommend to council yay or nay. This is something we should move forward with, and here's how we should do it. Or, yeah, no, we looked at it, we don't think it's in the best interest of the city. That's kind of where I see those are our two choices right now.
Yeah, Commissioner Hoopengarner, to add to that, I see merit to this zone text. I said before, and it seems like other people feel that way today, that there has not been a lot of transparency in terms of how this came to be, because and I don't usually say this, but what I saw in the staff report and what I heard and observed from those events were different, or not discussed. But that being said, I wonder if we can look at this analytically to see what we think would make it better. And I would even throw out there that we could include a statement like, the commission also requests some clarity on what city council's intent may be, and there's a consensus this is good, or there were mixed opinions, or some sort of statement that goes with it too, so that it's like, okay, here we've looked at this twice now, but clearly we're wondering what the intent is. So it's always hard for us to steer the ship when we don't have a lot of that data today, but maybe we could at least see what we want changed and what we're looking at, and then decide based on those changes what we want to do, if that makes sense.
I guess, it comes back to, again, the core of the thing. If we vote to, say yay, and here we fixed it and we send it forward, then it goes to council, and council gets another 70, 80, 90 letters saying, oh, hell no. And then council has to come to us again and say, well, then why did you recommend this if there's just such across the board opposition in the community to it? So again, back to a benefit, a cost benefit analysis, is the benefit to the 6 hotels worth the cost to all of the neighbors of those hotels in those communities? I know Commissioner Gregoire and I live about equidistance from one of these. And we've been on the receiving end of the noise. And
But that's, yeah, I have 2 for whatever it's worth. I live less than 500 feet from a hotel with rooftop amenities on Sunset Boulevard. So yeah, I get it.
So many of us have lived through this.
Yeah.
So,
Commissioner Huppengar, I totally get what you're saying, but that's also making the assumption that we can't mitigate any of the sound.
agreed.
So, I mean, and then we go back to the sound study, the sound test. For me, in our last conversation, you and I were very concerned about enforcement. And
About what?
I still think that any hotel that applies for this program should hire or dedicate somebody between 5 p.m. and closing to mitigate the sound so that it doesn't become a burden on the neighborhood. With that, I can go through all the things that I've just been asking over and over again to clarify a motion. I think we could get there. But if the original intent was not this, then
Exactly.
I don't know what to do with that.
Exactly. I mean, it was not the directive of Councilmember Heilman and council, and it was never the intent. And unfortunately, the original intent was to help our businesses in the heart of COVID, and nothing was done with that original initiative to address those items, which is kind of sad, which is when they really needed it. So we're looking at this 4 years later, and the initial, need is long gone, and
But like Genevieve said, it is good for the businesses, and if we can mitigate the cons of it, and make the sound barriers work and have proper enforcement,
well,
we have the necessary reviews, planning commission, neighborhood meetings, the sound tests.
Let me ask one more question, though, because I wrote this note down because staff pointed out that yet to come forward is the item, the new ZTA, about non-hotel guest uses of hotel facilities. And that's particularly germane in the residential neighborhoods because they have no infrastructure for rideshare drop-offs, et cetera. And yes, I understand where staff is saying, well, this is a separate thing. This is just about building the infrastructure, and that other ZTA that's going to come forward is going to be out, what can you use it for? But that, I feel, is very, you get a little chicken and egg here. What do you get an approval to build this thing, and then they come back and say, oh, well, we want to use it for weddings, 6 nights a week. And so now you've got a construction, but the proposed use is not designed for that, and now you've got retrofitting, and I think the separation of these two is a little dicey in and of itself. So
just to throw out some of the points that I think that were the most important for consideration in this context, just to make the conversation as productive as possible. It sounds like there's a lot of thoughts around a more sufficient sound barrier, moving it up from the minimum up from 5 feet. No.
Yeah, I don't know if I feel that way either. However, I do think that emphasizing the importance of the noise study or outright requiring it and not making it gray would help in that matter.
Okay.
And for the potential scenario as to why maybe it wasn't written that way in the code right now, I would say the noise study would be a simple statement that it doesn't apply.
Talking about
if it doesn't apply.
Making the noise study not at the discretion of the community development director, but making it apply to projects across the board. Okay, that was one I had on here. I personally would have liked to see a higher minimum than 5 feet, but if that's not the will of the body, then yeah, it's fine.
I don't know if sports courts go into that for me. That's where I feel like 5 isn't going to necessarily, but again, maybe that's noise study. That's the one thing that makes me wonder if 5 is too low. I don't know how that's handled.
Well, yeah, and that's back to where the speakers are located in terms of the law.
So
but the noise study will
Sorry, I was just going to say for the 2 points from Commissioner Matos, just while the council's deliberating, if they choose to move forward with it, I think there was talk by the commission for section 1936-150C4 that talks about the noise study. And if the Planning Commission did want to move this forward with a recommendation to approve, the zone text amendment, of course, the Planning Commission has the discretion to appoint Commissioner Hoopengarner as raised if they can't make the findings and don't want to recommend approval. But should there be a desire to amend that section and get rid of the discretion of the Community Development Director, I think the Commission could just remove the clause that says with potential for noise impacts as determined by the Director. So that section would just read, if applying for a rooftop structure projecting above the height limit pursuant to the section, the applicant shall hire an independent consultant, and then the rest of the section talks about that noise study. So I just wanted to put that in the record in response to Commissioner Matos' comment. And then I think the other section he mentioned that the Commission was talking about, 1936 150 C6, little c2, that would say noise barriers of at least 5 feet in height or a different height greater than 5 feet as determined by the noise study. So I just wanted to throw those 2 points out there as sort of the what I heard from the Commission about those specific items.
Okay.
I would support those changes.
Isaac, when you were giving those changes, did you also make note about the independent noise study and that shouldn't be hired by the applicant but selected by staff?
I didn't. I think it's certainly up to Commission's purview to talk through that process.
We could add after that sentence that Isaac just read, that the city shall hire at the applicant's expense an independent consultant. So we can make it very specific.
I would agree with that language.
I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, likewise.
Could we repeat that language one more time for me?
Okay, yeah, sure. So the new line would say, if applying for a rooftop structure projecting above the height limit pursuant to this section, the city shall hire at the applicant's expense an independent consultant or agency whose principal, blah, 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 so it then goes on.
Okay.
So we would strike the discretion of the Community Development Director and then state that the city shall hire at the applicant's expense a noise consultant.
So the city would be selecting in that scenario? Okay. So that would keep it independent?
Could you restate the, it's page 10 of 12 in the resolution, C, and then 2, the noise barrier, 5 feet, the proposed text?
Yes, Chair Lombardi. So noise barriers of at least 5 feet in height or a different height greater than 5 feet as determined by the noise study. So it would replace the or a different height.
Okay, thank you.
Can we also clarify that the sound test is done after it has been built? And any modifications that need to be made after the test are done before the CUP or the permit is issued?
Yeah, I think we can add prior to the final inspection by the building official. Does that make sense? Okay.
Something we did not talk about was FAR, floor area ratio, and I found that to be confusing. I don't know if anyone else did or if it's just me, but I thought it was strange that there was a proposed modification on how you calculate something that to me is a metric that shouldn't be redefined by us. So page 7 of 12 on the resolution, where there's the table under structures, there's an asterisk that says these improvements are not considered in calculating the overall height or allowable floor area ratio. Should it say something more like are in addition to the allowable floor area ratio? I don't know if we should be recalculating or redefining floor area ratio as opposed to simply stating that it's in addition to it.
Well, it's excluding it from the FAR calculation is the point.
Yeah.
Is saying, you're allowed, 2.5 FAR on this project, and here is another 15 feet, and any related FAR doesn't count towards your maximum, which I find problematic. Back to, there's a reason we have these FAR requirements. There's a reason we have zoning. There's a reason we have the things that we chose when we went through the planning process, when we went through the general plan. And we're back to saying, but never mind.
Yes, I get nervous about code too. I guess floor area ratio is not part of safety code, but
No, it's about the density. What is the, the density that's allowed, the height and the density, the mass, et cetera, of a particular parcel, given the zoning that, that we voted on back when we went through the general plan process. And we as a community went through parcel by parcel, literally, and said, this is this, this is this. We don't want this bigger than that. We don't, that's what we did as a community.
Yeah.
And to take a pen and go, never mind. It's a conscious decision.
So maybe it's a question for legal. These improvements are not considered in calculating the allowable floor area ratio. Is that muddying the water?
Yeah, I think the intent for that particular provision is that most of the hotels that are already at their height limit are probably also at their existing FAR. So not allowing them any additional allowance for an additional, for additional FAR to accommodate the rooftop structures may make them not actually work out. So if we are going to move forward with allowing them, then I think that's where we were trying to figure out to give them an allowance for an FAR so that they could actually build those things.
Well, that's back to, I'm looking at page, I know there's no page numbers on it, page 2 of the red line, and section 4, and that whole business of hotel height and density shall be consistent with the underlying residential zone, except for permitted projections above the height limit for hotel rooftop structures, which may exceed the height limit and FAR, and this is where we had the conversation about the words in permitted zones, with approval of a conditional use permit.
I do think, to Director Contreras' point, that the inclusion there of height limit is important to the overall conditional use of the exceeding the height, but I think it may be inappropriate, depending on how the commission ultimately decides how they want to handle the zone text amendment, to potentially request clarification as part of the item that the council will consider on that piece, and the clarity about permitted zones that Commissioner Hoopengartner's mentioning.
And to be clear, that section applies to new projects, which I find very problematic in light of the intention of this original ZTA. This is about adding 15 feet to all new hotel projects potentially.
Is there any other discussion in terms of concerns within the text?
I mean, this hasn't been discussed, but I've been thinking a lot about it, the 15 feet and having
Yes.
HVAC and mechanical on top of it. That could be a real eyesore because the city requires screens.
I'm sorry, having what on top of it?
Mechanical.
The HVAC
Mechanical, yeah.
or any mechanical, because the city requires screens. So then you get these sometimes not so great looking screens. And if we have a setback on the roof deck, why can't we just use the roof deck? And,
I agree.
And that way they'll make the buildings or the little additions a little bit more attractive.
Did staff have a proposed modification? I think you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, we can add another sentence to, if we are on page 7 of 12 of the resolution, where we have the table that includes projections for hotel rooftop structures, where it states other requirements. We can add a second sentence that says, no additional projections shall be allowed above the hotel rooftop structures that shall make the structures exceed the 15-foot limit.
Great.
So we will add it there, and then we will also add it as an additional development standard. So we would add it as a new line item E on page 11 of 12. To basically indicate the same thing. No additional projections shall be allowed above the hotel rooftop structures that shall make the structures exceed the 15-foot limit.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
And 6C, noise reduction measures for projections above the height limit for hotel rooftop structures with the potential for noise impacts, comma, as determined by director. Is that going to be struck as well?
Commissioner Hoopengardner, I think I understand, and I believe the answer is probably yes, but suddenly my mic is very loud. Could you repeat the subsection just to make sure we have it clear?
6C, the definition section of noise reduction measures. It says, noise reduction measures for projections above the height limit for hotel rooftop structures with a potential for noise impacts as determined by the director. And I think we had a conversation around, no. If there's a rooftop projection, it has a noise impact not determined by the director.
Commissioner Hoopengardner, I believe that makes sense in the context of the earlier edit that the commission was considering. That would be consistent with the change to C6, little c2. I'm sorry, no, 1936 150 C4, the noise study portion, to remove that language that says with potential for noise impacts as determined by the director. So if the commission moves forward with that, that would be a consistent change that could be part of the recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. That's confusing. If we were to change the text, we should pick it up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Carvalero?
Yeah, I have one more.
Uh-huh.
Only because our last meeting, we harped on this quite a bit, and that's enforcement. And I'm just asking staff, is there any world where a successful applicant is required to hire or dedicate somebody on staff from 5 p.m. till closing to monitor the volume of the sound, and say within 200 feet of the hotel, the residents get to have that phone number so that if it happens, they have somebody to call?
Right, so that seems like it'd probably be more tied to the activity. So we'd want to probably add that condition to that particular activity so that other CUP, where they're actually dealing with the actual activities that are going to happen, or with their special event permit, for example. So I think it probably makes more sense in that aspect when reviewing those permits than in this particular text.
Does anybody else care about this? Or
I would absolutely agree to the item, but I think it does belong with the event itself. Again, it's hard envisioning this construction in a vacuum. You know, why would you build this 15-foot, however big, with the bathroom and the kitchen and a thing without some intended use? And so in that context, yeah, we should be looking at all of these things. And that's one of the problems I have with separating this, is that it doesn't, you're not, no one's going to come to us and say, I want to build a thing. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it. I haven't decided how I'm going to use it, how I'm going to staff it, how I'm, what kind of marketing I'm going to do. It's not going to happen. This is never going to be built in a vacuum. I mean, you're an architect. What's the program?
yeah, I mean, if it comes to planning commission, we could make that condition when we're reviewing the project, if it's appropriate.
That's been my understanding, is that the saving grace in this is on a project-by-project basis. We have the ability to go in and create individual conditions on the CUP, whether it be new or modification, that are specific to that project based on public input, public comment, and things like that. You know, I mentioned at the last meeting, and I know it's a different thing given that a structure is being built, but at the same time, staff did mention it. We do, as a body, have the ability to revoke or modify a license based on, a nuisance status or something to that effect. So, when I was on the Business License Commission, I realized this is not the Business License Commission. When there was a new license that was being issued, we were putting in requirements that they come in for a 12-month review or a 24-month review, where we were actually looking at the complaints and seeing if it was constituting a nuisance consideration.
And we've definitely done that, and
then
there was cause for doing that.
Exactly, and then that would give us the authority, as we brought up today, to make a revocation if it warranted that, or a modification, or some sort of change to the use, given that it would be coming forward in a conditional use permit.
But I think to Commissioner Cavaliero's point is that we've got do we really want to set up a situation where we have to, every one of these, 3, 6, 12-month review periods, because we definitely have sat here and had, some pretty unfortunate situations with noise. And do we really want to be in a situation where we have to do that on every single project? And then, it's back to code enforcement and their ability to truly, be responsive. Because I can tell you chapter and verse number of stories from neighbors who've said, yeah, I called code enforcement. They came an hour and a half later, and by then the music was gone. Well, thanks for nothing, and then code enforcement says, I didn't hear anything, so there's nothing to report, so there's no report. So you get into this do loop, and that's just a nightmare for everybody. It wastes code enforcement time, it alienates the neighbors from the business.
So what's the
It's
proposal?
just not a good way to run a business.
What's the proposal to address it?
Don't do it.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that.
In my limited experience on the commission, it seems like that type of proposal worked well at the last meeting with Barry's. And what we heard from code enforcement earlier is it's not a report of getting on site and seeing the activity. They reported the calls they received. So that sort of conditional approval, again, each and every one of these projects have to come back before us. So this is not the last time that we'll talk about hotel rooftops. And having conditions of approval on each one of them where they come back in 6 months, 12 months for review. If there haven't been any complaints, I would assume it'd probably be on our consent calendar. If there have been calls that have been made, gets pulled from that. It's discussion. That's when the people from the public can come and talk about the horror stories that they've seen or not seen. In my experience, that worked well with Barry's.
Yeah, and then just to clarify one other thing, at the end of the day, staff is saying that this is about the structure, not the activity. If they were going to change their activity, they would have to get approval for the change in activity as well through the CUP.
Not if they get a special event permit.
Through a CUP, though. If it
Not
was
if
an
they get a
ongoing change. A special event permit's different.
Yeah, but that's a dozen
that's a
times a
one-off.
year at a minimum, and there's discussion about increasing the number of special event permits.
Got
And
it.
that all
Yeah.
impacts the neighborhood.
Yeah. But those are granted on a one-off basis, not a continual basis.
Say what?
They're granted on a one-off basis, not a continual basis?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you summarize where we're at with the changes?
I can, sure. I also wanted to note there was some discussion from the commission, and Chair Lombardi mentioned this, and the commission also has obviously the discretion, should it choose, to make recommendations to council. I know there was discussion about requesting clarity from the city council on sort of the scope of their intent, so I did want to send that back to the commission. I know there was some discussion on that.
Is there I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
Are you okay with me talking?
Sure, yeah. I would just add, I'm curious what you all think about that, or if there's interest in that. So if you want to go first, or if you have something else to say,
I
that's
don't know
fine
if
too.
this is an option, but I think what I would feel most comfortable with is, with discussion and hopefully some consensus here, is to move it forward, but kind of with the proviso that, we would like there to be clarification. How do I want to say this? I didn't think about this before I opened my mouth. My bad.
I think that you're on the same page as me, though, in that regard.
Being able to make specific recommendations about the way that the resolution is crafted right now, but with the, I don't want to say it's a caveat, but with the proviso that, there was a lack of clarity from the commission regarding the intent of the ZTA. I think if people are comfortable with that, I'm very comfortable making specific changes and recommendations to the reso as it's crafted right now. And as we've discussed, I think I'm aligned with everything that we've talked about changing so far. But I would, if possible, and city attorney, Isaac, you can tell me if
I guess
that is or is not, but
we'd be asking the council to make a determination about, some of the council members now weren't even, I'm on, my mic's on. Oh. Some of the council members now weren't even on the council back then.
right.
So I'm not as focused upon the origination of how we got to this point, more what's in front of us and what we want to move forward to council. And if they don't like it because it didn't match their original intent or because the people that are there now have a different idea about it, they can always vote it down and vote not to adopt this zone text amendment. If they adopt it, each and every hotel project is still going to come back in front of us.
I understand your concern, and I guess I just see it differently. It looks to me like there was an intent, and the council was different, about something that was about operation hours and operation and who has access to the amenities. And then recently, a totally different thing came forward first, and there wasn't discussion. And that's why I'm so confused. But I do feel like I'd be comfortable moving something forward with some notes to just make sure that we're able to do our best job understanding what we're being asked to do. I just don't like making decisions without clarity or vision, and I feel like I don't see that right now. But I feel like there's ways we can make it better. I just don't understand the framework of all of this. Vice Chair Gregoire.
Yeah, you know what? Look, if we're moving this forward, we don't need to ask the city council what their intent is. The city council, I think Commissioner Solomon just said it, if they can kill it. You know, if this doesn't reflect what they were intending, they will kill it, or they can send it back to us. But I think we have crafted some good changes to staff's recommendation, and unless anyone else has any additional changes, I think we should move staff's recommendation with the changes that we've discussed and send it to City Council and let them decide what they're going to do with it as the elected representatives of the City of West Hollywood.
Was that a motion?
Could I make
I think that Commissioner Jones wanted to talk next. Oh, sorry. Question of staff.
Is there a summary of staff before we can?
Okay, so let's hear Commissioner Jones, and then we can, we have a couple things here. So before we go back to staff, just to make sure that you're aligned too.
Yeah, I think at minimum, I would just ask that staff include language in the staff report to council that there was extensive conversation and that it be captured in a way that is, kind of true to the spirit of our meeting and our conversation here tonight, that there was extensive conversation about the intent of the direction from council, and that I think prolonged our deliberation.
I mean, yeah, I would add to that if I were to make a sentence, but this is what you all feel collectively. The commission made adjustments to the zone text amendment based on the content received. However, there was conversation regarding the overall intent, and the Planning Commission requests that City Council provide direction to staff and the Planning Commission as needed, something like that. But
that works. Do you mean they're not all intently watching this meeting right now?
Yeah, I just
like we were 4 years ago.
I think we could summarize discussion. I think we could summarize discussion and concern, but I think at the point that it reaches council, that there's not going to be any clarity to deliver to Planning Commission. They're going to make their decision based on what's in front of them. That's my opinion.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, hopefully they see and understand. Yeah. Every once in a while, it's like, why didn't they? And right now, I feel like I don't know.
Yeah, I just want it recorded. I mean, it's being recorded, but recorded in the staff report for posterity that we did have pretty extensive conversation about it up and down the dais.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I think it's notable. This is a little atypical. Commissioner Carvalero.
Yeah, I have one more that I'd like to discuss because I mentioned I don't want humans or people, and I'm not a wordsmith, I don't know how to phrase this, but going beyond the setback. Like, I don't want to see dance parties happening in that setback that we've been talking about doing landscaping. Can we make a decision that only landscaping happens in the setback so that we don't have people creating noise outside the sound barrier?
Agreed.
I'm aligned.
I agree too.
I mean, if we have to have that 22.5-foot setback and that's where the wall is, then there's no activity on the outside of the wall.
Would that be more appropriate to bring up each and every time
No.
one of these hotels comes in front of us, like with whatever activity it is that's planned up there?
No, because
So repeat
you
the
can't
question
mitigate sound without the wall. I mean, you can't have.
Right, because, yeah, right. if you put a dance party on the other side of the sound barrier is actually just going to bounce the sound back into the neighborhood.
Why wouldn't we put the sound barrier on the perimeter of the building then?
Because it's too far away from the source. So the closer you have the sound barrier to the source, the more refraction it has. So it'll buffer it.
It's
the minute,
also-
the minute you move it away, it actually travels over it.
It's also about the rooftop projections. There's a reason for the setback of the projections is to not create the visual impact of a taller building. So the reason for the 18 foot for every foot is that you keep moving in and in and in so that when you're at the street level, you're not seeing a taller building. And if you put that, and you know, Commissioner Matos, you're suggesting a 6 or 7 foot sound barrier. Well, imagine a 7 foot masonry wall all the way around the building. Now you've effectively almost
Well,
created
my thought
another.
is that they also allow plexiglass, so that's the thought.
But you're effectively creating another story on that, of height on that building.
As the code
It doesn't have to be masonry, though. It could be something else, but.
And commissioners, I think,
Because for every foot of building, you have to set
Set it
back
back.
18 inches. So
Well, but he's saying,
you would
why not
never
just
have-
put it at the edge? And
Pardon?
I'm saying, he's saying, why not just put it at the edge of the building? And
Oh,
I'm
yes,
saying,
but that goes back to the sound barrier.
right, and that's why I'm saying no, because the whole point of the setback is is the visual impact.
Yeah, we're
Not
saying
the,
the same.
there's two separate things.
As
There's
well
the
as light
sound
and
impact and the visual impact.
and light and circulation too.
Exactly.
so commissioners, I just have one note. I think one potential issue just with revising that setback language is that it's specific to a rooftop structure projecting above the height limit. So it's the structure as opposed to, I think, the use of what could be in the setback, which may be outside the parameters of just what's being regulated. I wonder if there's an opportunity, since the council will provide directions on some of those other items, that we're going to come back whether or not it's a request to look at use restrictions as opposed to the structure which is being regulated here, if that makes sense. I think that's my only concern. It might be use specific that may not be captured by the setback associated with the actual structure.
Yeah, to me, it's a use restriction.
Well, actually, you bring up a good point. So if we're talking, you want to build a 15-foot structure, and it's got the 15-foot structure has to be 22 feet away from the parapet, the edge of the building. That gives you your visual reduction. But then back to the sound wall, you're going to want outdoor uses outside of that structure. So now the question is, where does that sound barrier go?
No, because you can't have anything in the setback. So that 15-foot building will be the wall, and nobody can go beyond that wall.
So you're saying that
there's no additional sound barrier because you have a 15-foot wall, which could be a bar structure or whatever, which is already the sound barrier, which is bouncing sound back into the habitable space.
Well, I guess I'm thinking of a 15-foot, you know, 2-stall bathroom plus a kitchen, okay? And that's your 15-foot structure. But then there's a patio, there's dining area, there's sunning, tanning beds, whatever, in the area, okay? So the 15-foot structure has to be 22 feet away. But now, where's the sound wall around that space, and how tall does, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but those are already approved uses, and this doesn't have any impact on those uses.
We're back to chicken and egg.
I don't know, I'm clear on that.
So we need a whiteboard here.
No, I can visualize it, but
Yeah.
I mean, if it's an existing use,
So
it probably
you're
already
saying
has the
that
sound
the-
attenuation that it needs.
That the sound wall would be at the 22 feet.
Well, the structure would be the sound wall, because that would be the requirement.
So you're saying the structure would be the sound wall?
Yeah, because everything's
then it would
happening on
be-
the other side of the wall.
But then it would be 100% interior use, and there would be no exterior use.
Well, okay, so when you say patio around that structure, if there is an existing use where they have lounges or, you know, whatever, then that would be permitted because it's an existing use. I don't.
Well, I'm thinking a new thing.
Yeah. me too.
Okay, there's no existing use in terms of a patio or whatever. This is very
So it has
confusing.
no existing use. It's a new structure.
Mhm.
It's 15 feet tall. It's 22'6" from the edge. All I'm saying is that I want to restrict the use of that setback so that it doesn't create more sound issues.
Agreed, 100%.
Okay.
I just concerned that the confusion will be there's the setback and then the wall. So I guess what you're saying is the wall would be at the 22 feet. You could build the 15-foot structure then further in even.
See, what you're doing is you're separating the sound barrier from the structure.
Yeah.
I'm saying the structure can be the sound barrier. Because if it's a masonry building that's 15 feet
Mhm.
tall, there's your sound barrier. Why do we need another sound barrier that's already there?
But it assumes all of the noise is in the interior of the structure.
Right, so we have to look at it from a case-by-case basis
Use,
if it
that
actually
we're-
works,
we're
which is
back
what we're
to
here for.
needing to understand the use before we can approve
Right.
the building. And there's the problem.
I guess that's why it's a conditional use permit, right? So that we can determine that. I did not hear any motions.
Sorry, Chair, I think there was a request to read in the changes that the commission has requested before, so I'm going to,
Can I just double check and make sure that on item 6C4 IV? Oops, my mic is going in and out. 6C IV4, we discussed that the speakers be no higher than 3 feet? Is
Correct.
that included?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, if I can, I can.
To be clear on that, if the sound wall were higher, if it were higher than 5 feet, could the speakers be higher than 3 feet? I understand your point that if the wall's 5 feet, speakers shouldn't be 5 feet, they're going to escape the top. But if someone wants to build bigger,
Then maybe we say that the speakers shall be no higher than 2 feet below the top of the sound wall.
Yeah.
Does that get the job done?
That makes sense to
I don't
me.
know. I think that's,
What?
I kind of like your 3 foot from finished floor idea better.
it's much easier to track.
Mm-hmm.
My only thought with increasing the sound barrier height was that the average person is over 5 foot tall, but if y'all want to just keep that and do the other way, then that's fine. But yeah, I stick by my recommendation. I do think that the sound wall minimum should be higher, but it's okay if we don't have consensus. Yeah. All right, then I would ask for it to be at least 6 feet. And that's based on
I'm okay with that.
the fact that we asked the sound expert
I agree,
in
we
this
did not get a
meeting
clear answer.
if 6 feet would be more sufficient, and he said yes.
I'm okay with it too. Yeah.
Sounds good.
It leaves a lot less up to discretion, which is probably a good thing, given all of the conversation we're having.
Chair, so if I may, is it possible for me to read all the changes?
As long
to
as
the-
there's no more questions up here, which I believe we got them all now. Yeah, okay.
Fantastic. All right, and then I'll just go through page by page in the resolution. So I am now in page 7 of 12, and this is where we're adding the second sentence to the table at the bottom of that page, and that's a second sentence to that last column where it says other requirements. So we're adding the sentence that says, no additional projections shall be allowed above the hotel rooftop structures that shall make the structures exceed the 15-foot limit. Then the next correction is on page 9 of 12, where we are talking about the noise study, and the first sentence is being revised so that it mentions, if applying for a rooftop structure or structures projecting above the height limit pursuant to this section, the city shall hire at the applicant's expense an independent consultant or an agency whose principal has obtained a degree from, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the condition that will be an independent consultant and the city will hire it.
And you're striking or is otherwise pre-qualified by the director or designee?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll be striking that out. And now on the following page, 10 of 12, we are striking out from C, noise reduction measures, the phrase as determined by the director from that first paragraph. And then in CII, we have requirement for or noise barriers of at least 6 feet in height or a different height greater than 6 feet as determined by the noise study. Does that make sense? And then on page 11 of 12, probably the second sentence there at the top paragraph, prior to we're striking out public hearing, and we're saying prior to the final inspection by the building official, the applicant will perform the system check. Okay, and then just right below in IV, we are striking out 5 feet for the height limit of the speakers. So we're saying that speakers will not project above the height limit or shall be placed on the floor no higher than 3 feet instead of 5 feet.
Off the finished floor, we agreed, right? Yeah.
Should be placed no higher than 3 feet above the finished floor. Okay.
I apologize. Can I get clarification on what I'm having trouble hearing? Page 10, 2, noise barriers of at least 6 feet. And then what was the rest of the modification, just for precision?
Sure. Noise barriers of at least 6 feet in height or a different height greater than 6 feet as determined by the...
I think that the or was what we didn't like before in that. Or a different height, not.
Chair, it does capture the intent that it be at least 6 feet or a greater height as determined by the noise study. So it allows that to be higher.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then continuing on page 11.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Back on the speakers.
Mm-hmm.
No higher than 3 feet or lower as required by the noise study.
No higher than 3 feet above the finished floor. Okay, so we're adding the word lower. So no higher than 3 feet above the finished floor or lower as required by the noise study. Does that make sense? Okay. And then we're adding a new letter E to that section, which includes the language about no additional projections shall be allowed above the hotel rooftop structures that shall make the structures exceed the 15-foot limit. So the same language that we added in the table above. And I think that's all questions. Yes.
I have one more to ask. When you talked about the sound system check, I can imagine an inspector, say the test fails, and I can imagine a situation where the inspector gives them a condition to fix it, but will issue the permit, and then the applicant can modify it whenever they want. I would prefer that they do the test. If the test fails, they need to make sure, they need to pass the test before they are issued the CUP or permit.
Agreed. That's in little 3.
it's tough, but.
Commissioner Carriero, would it be sufficient to say prior to the final inspection by the building official, the applicant shall perform and pass a systems check?
Yeah,
Correct.
perfect. Yep, great.
On that, I would move staff's recommendation with those changes.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, Commissioner Carvalero seconded the motion. Is there any further debate, or can we, excuse me, any further debate, or can we go to vote? Vote, okay.
And the motion passes on 6 ayes. Commissioner Hooper and Gardner voting no. Resolution number PC 241560 there is no appeal process. This is a recommendation going forward to the City Council.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 11, new business. We have none. On 12, unfinished business, none. Excluded consent calendar, none. Item 14, items from staff, planning managers update, item 14A.
No updates?
No updates. How about subcommittee management, 14B?
Yes, so I'd like to provide you with just the upcoming items that are currently tentatively scheduled on our agenda for both the Planning Commission and some of the subcommittees. Currently at the September 5th Planning Commission meeting, we do have a hearing for a development agreement at 8920 Sunset Boulevard. We also have a general plan amendment for the incorporation of our new updated local hazard mitigation plan. So that should be a fairly straightforward item. And then we are also bringing an item that's a council directive, sort of an urgency item regarding the early demolition permit for certain vacant properties. So that'll be coming in September. There's another item in September, so it might be a very busy meeting unless we move some things around, a zone text amendment regarding ministerial housing permits. And that's in addition to some legislative housing bills that we want to incorporate into the zoning code.
Is that September 19th?
That's September 19th, correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then just a couple of items in October 3rd. There is a zone text amendment for looking at EV charging sites and EV service stations, as well as a change of use from residential to commercial at 7748 Santa Monica Boulevard. So that's at Santa Monica and Genesee. And as of now, there are no items scheduled for design review subcommittee, nothing currently on schedule for SASE. Long range planning project subcommittee, we do have some items for September 19th. We are going to be reviewing sort of our annual ADU ordinance amendments. So that's going to be coming to the long range planning, as well as a look at equitable building performance standards. So that's an item that's implementing some of our programs in our climate action plan. And that's all I have, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 15, public comment. Anyone for public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. Item 16, items for commissioners. I would actually like to start with just one FYI, if staff can confirm this too, but we had a very long planning commission meeting a couple of months ago, 8550 Sunset Boulevard, if I got the address right, the Viper Room project. Thank you, confirmed. I think that is going to City Council on Monday, 26 August. So just wanted to note that. Any other items from commissioners?
Just one.
Yes.
The week of October 14th, yours truly's got jury duty, and I may have commute issues.
Okay.
So,
noted.
Just putting a stake in the, who knows, maybe not.
You're going to do great on the jury.
I usually get kicked off.
I love jury duty.
Can I just confirm that these October, why do I have this listed as canceled? I have it on my calendar that the October 3rd meeting is canceled. Is that wrong?
The regular planning commission meeting.
Not canceled.
I believe it is canceled, the October 3rd meeting.
It is canceled.
Yeah, that was canceled during when the calendar was presented to you last year. There's a holiday
Okay.
there.
So is that Rosh Hashanah? Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Okay,
Okay, so
so-
there is no October 3rd meeting.
So that item may
Correct.
not occur on that date.
Okay, that's what I just want to make sure.
Thank you for catching that one.
Okay.
Any other items? Okay, thank you. Okay, in that case, I will adjourn this meeting. And the next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, September 5th, 2024, here at Council Chambers. Thank you.
The world's worst mom, you know. And then when I transitioned, I started